Yo, Atlas speaking and welcome back to the channel. I'm back with part 4 of What If I Was Reborn in Naruto as Danzo Shimura. Sorry for the long wait. I had been busy. There's a better explanation in the community tab anyways, let the tale begin. Chapter 27, Sealing the Deals. This is tough. I could only nod in agreement as I helped my little brother into getting through the tree climbing exercise. Hanzo had shown interest in becoming a shinobi and had already joined the academy to start his career in the Corps, but there was something that he couldn't learn right now due to how young he was. As far as I was concerned, tree climbing and water walking were both abilities that were essential for a ninja to learn through the academy, so I was more than glad to help him getting the edge over the others. It wasn't much, if I have to be honest, and Hanzo was a bit disappointed it wasn't anything flashy, but he still decided to learn both important techniques when I mentioned that it would have helped him immensely by the time he started to learn serious ninjutsus. Both abilities were advanced versions of the leaf exercise after all, and better chakra control meant an easier time getting a new technique down to work as quickly as possible. I would offer him some examples through the first exercise, and then he would go for it until he understood how to do it as flawlessly as possible. I told him what to be more careful about, and he still had to get through 2 steps as he tended to fall a lot. How about we take a small break? The key of the exercise is patience, so it wouldn't do you any good if you get too worked up about it. He remained quiet, still lying on the grass and staring in annoyance at the tree for some time before nodding and accepting my offer. I helped him stand up as we walked back to the spent bonfire right where a tiny Kurama had been sleeping near to, a cool breeze keeping us from getting too heated up about today's particularly high temperature. We sat down and we quietly took a moment to silently look around our surroundings. We were the only ones in that field, and I knew we just had 2 or so hours before we would need to leave as others had requested for this training ground later today. I didn't have any reason to not be calm, especially when things were going so smoothly for me and I was improving steadily with my studies over seals. I was still focusing on expanding my physical and chakra-related abilities, but seals were definitely something I was growing quite fond of. At first I was worried that due to the endless potential I had before me I would have just forsaken the need to train the rest of me, but I was pleasantly surprised when it just became a part of what I am as a shinobi, a strong but not an absolute one at that. With projects between expanding what I had of the farming here in Konoha and finalizing some flaws to the seals I planned to introduce to Suna, I was pretty much set to merely train while I waited for the Hokage to come up with a decision over what to do with my proposal. I couldn't pressure Hashirama, not without appearing too vehement about it and giving off a sense of suspicious urgency on the matter. I knew he wanted his wife to check on the seals and make sure that I had done a fine job before giving me a clear answer, and I knew that a thorough analysis needed time, something that Mito didn't have as much as I did due to her roles and duties, both as the Hokage's wife and the mother of twins. The kids were adorable. They were already crawling around, with Orin being the most active of the duo as she displayed an early inquisitive nature with how eager to see and learn she was. Kazuhiko was also moving around, but he seemed to know from a look at his own mother that he had to pause and remain put. I had the chance to babysit them for a while, together with Yoshiko. The girl was, as expected, all coy and cuddly when it came to dealing with her cousins, but I could tell the children were just partially happy about that attitude. One thing that I knew about toddlers and puppies was that they might love the affection, but they were rather quick to have some trouble handling too much of it. So, by being the more moderate between the two, I wasn't that surprised that the twins seemed to prefer me as a nice place to nap on whenever they felt the need to rest. Or talk. Or even playing when it came to catch them while they were crawling around. Not the calmest visits, but I wasn't even keen to complain from what I expected to find from 2 toddlers. They were loud, but not enough to make me want to plunge 2 kunais into my ears. Just as I finished that brief musing, I found my attention stolen by Hanzo as the younger boy decided to ask me something that caught me off guard. "So, are you ever going to let Mom try to have another husband?" he inquired with a cautious tone. "Are you referring to Madara? She likes him as an outstanding shinobi and person. She knows he is my good sensei and that isn't as arrogant as rumors say he is. She loves him, Hanzo repeated strongly. I read her diary and dash. You what? I interjected fiercely, shocked by the stretch he went for this. And because of how he learned about this. Wait, Mom has a diary? It's more of a thinking book. She puts her thoughts there, not regularly but, she wrote so much about him. At first it was like you said, but now she does think of that possibility. My lips twitched in discomfort, frustrated by the idea that her denseness wasn't as powerful as I would have wanted in. I had to deal with this. Once and for all, from the looks of it. It would be a mistake for her. And for him. She deserves a chance to be happy. You told me that you were fine with it so, you wouldn't say no to other men? If she is happy with those other candidates and they're not bad people, I wouldn't refuse, I admitted flatly, getting a frown out of him as he stood up. I see, he muttered with some annoyance and I recognized both the degree of butthurt and the way he responded. I closed my eyes and I felt a thin layer of chakra messing up with my senses. Irritation flashed on my face and I glared at the confused Hanzo. How about you break the illusion at once? I thought you would have preferred to speak face to face, no trickery or mask in between, I flatly pointed out. Sensei. With the Genjutsu discovered, Madara didn't even bother keeping up any appearances as he dispelled the illusion and allowed me to spare a swift look around to see how much was altered. Hanzo had been put to sleep, he was resting for a while from the looks of it while Madara managed to replace him in his seat through the illusion. You really have a weak spot when you're distracted with your thoughts. I almost felt ridiculed by that comment as I knew he was just raising that criticism to make less attention to himself. Before answering that, I spared a glance to Kurama and realized that he had fallen asleep, thus why he had remained this much quiet. Guess I can't exactly rely on a tailed beast that loves to nap a lot nowadays. Lazy fox. This is a training ground that has been checked thoroughly for any infiltration. The only thing to worry is for possible traitors, I remarked dryly, returning Madara his own dull gaze back at him. He didn't seem pleased, but I was far from done. So, now you decided to read personal diaries? I didn't. You just said that. An illusion can't be complete if the user doesn't know how to make the argumentation within it reasonably realistic. I just lied for the sake of making my acting the most convincing possible and, no, I would not be this forward with Minako-chan. My lips twitched in irritation at that infuriating honorific. First name basis, that's how he felt to be right now with Mom. And yet you thought it would be a smart decision to interrogate me that way? I asked, mildly annoyed. If you were less stubborn, then I would have been more than happy to entertain a proper conversation. And yet I found out quite recently that my good student has a penchant for dodging discussions when it comes to this topic. The sarcasm was so dry I could almost feel the salty taste tied to it. Sure, I might have taken the route of outright bailing the moment the argument was brought up by Madara, but I was within my rights to just rush away at a topic that I didn't like. And, at the same time, what he did was a dick move. I wasn't willing to forgive him with ease. But before I could say anything about it and get him to stop being this pushy, I was interrupted by Madara once more. After you're done with your brother, I wish to speak with you in private, the head of the Uchiha clan spoke solemnly. We shall enjoy lunch together at the Akimichi restaurant. I already got reservations and I will hunt you down if you don't give it to me. I scowled. You really aren't going to let this go, aren't you? Much to my surprise, I was met with a surprisingly stern look. Yes. Standing up, Madara made his way out of the training field, leading me to finally get Hanzo to wake up and resume his training. Much to my relief, the child was quick to wake up and he didn't inquire much about what had happened to him after I said he just took a nap for how stressful the exercise was. I decided to not tell him what happened with Madara, preferring to limit the number of people that were aware of this entire ordeal. With some energy back to him after that brief nap, we were quick to get back to his practicing session. After seeing him fall after a couple of steps into the exercise for a few more minutes, I finally saw him make it to the top of the tree he had been exercising on for a while and complete the first few bits of this exercise. The road to get to the point where he would be ready for water walking was still quite long, and I didn't plan to force him to rush it to even more failures in his attempt to make progress. The next parts were to have him gain confidence with the grasp on control and the pace behind the technique. The more he grew confident about it, the more he was going to build up his mental muscle to not take too long or too much attention to get working as intended. With Hanzo done with training after he got to a satisfactory point with it, I proceeded to lead him back home while I took Kurama to his spot, leading him to laze about despite the fact how much he fought to get to be around me for today. He wasn't really up to it, and I guess he just wasn't feeling it. Still, with these matters out of the way, only one remained, and I was indeed quite unsure how I was supposed to face him. And no, I'm not calling him Dad. Back in my previous life, I wasn't exactly an enthusiast when it came to Eastern barbecue food. I had my experience with the Western version, but I was quite certain what really enticed me to it was the presence of so many good meat-based dishes that made me salivate twice as usual by just looking at the menu. I mean, this was still some delicious food, and I was a bit famished from training a bit earlier to when I started with Hanzo. I needed my carbs. Having never liked the veggie menu if there wasn't a hint of meat or pasta mixed in, it had been some painful first days to get accustomed to that kind of cuisine, but now that I had the barbecue around and affordable, I could hope for a brighter future. I was still preferring mom-made food, but I was definitely the meat lover that I was in my previous life. But while previous visits to this establishment were jovial and fortuitous, this one was indeed a tense and particularly upsetting one for me. I wasn't sure what to expect from Madara as he silently munched at his fried chicken wings, barely giving me any vocal input as I sat right in front of him and gave a look at the first order I got out of this hopeful brief stay at the restaurant. The beef tataki, which was a plate filled with seared cuts of rare beef, was surprisingly light compared with what else was available to the place. I decided to not pick fried chicken wings since I knew that I had already eaten more than enough to become a problem if I continued to keep to that same snack before eating something more substantial. As I took out the first 2 slices of well-cooked meat, I heard Madara speak and I listened to what he had to say about it. I don't wish to create any trouble to what exists between us, nor I want to create issues for your mother when it comes to my status, both in the good and bad way. Why do you think going through with it is worth all of this? I asked with a flat tone, jumping straight at the core of this very issue. The Uchiha man looked surprised at the suddenness of the question, but he didn't allow himself to remain too quiet about it as he sighed and replied, I love your mother dash. Why? My swift but curt question was met with silence and I hummed, aiming to elaborate the question some more for him to understand. Why do you love Shimura Miniko, Uchiha Madara? I inquired as seriously as possible. How come someone of your rank, with a proud mindset and high standards, find my own mother, who isn't servile or even remotely tied to a strong clan, meant to fit with what you would need to secure a legitimately strong line of succession? Maybe I don't want her to be my trophy wife, he muttered quietly, and I looked up at him with a frown. He gave me a dead serious look. Maybe I genuinely find her a person I care and love. I frowned harder. Seriously? As much as it might sound strange, even for me, I don't think your mother is weak. Quite the contrary as far as I have seen and heard from her, Madara argued with a tired tone. While I had seen glimpses of her inner strength, I saw a full version of it when she started to send me messages where she wanted to know about your condition during the war. That wasn't exactly something I was aware about, but I could see Mom doing it. Sure, she sent me letters, but those were limited and mostly cheerful as much as she could be with the thought of her son serving in a big war. It didn't match with her general worry, and the idea she was shifting the letters to Madara, the one she knew that was going to keep tabs on me. I could tell that she did it so because she knew he was a reliable source of info about my conditions. At first I thought she was just partly strong due to your father no longer being around, but she isn't just that, I admitted, interrupting the man on the spot on where he was going with this. Mom is strong as a person when she feels like her family is being threatened. And even though you weren't the main cause of my leave dash, I was the one that had to still keep track of you and, in her opinion, provide her with information on a weekly basis. He interrupted me back, leaving my scowling at the interjection yet still listening to what he was adding through his story. When I asked her through a reply message what she would have done if I had refused due to the regulations I had to keep in mind for the conflict, she mentioned that she knew precisely where my bedroom was after talking with some Uchiha housewives and that Mido-sama was kind to her by providing her with a seal which main purpose was to release a dark purple colorant through a harmless explosion. I stared harshly at him as I tried to make sense as to how this threat was to be considered a good enough reason to think of Mom as a viable option as his future wife. And how does this connect with the love you feel for her? If before I had doubts about her genuine lack of interest in pursuing a romance to better her life, the fact she was willing to threaten me, albeit childishly, and going as far as brag that she didn't care about being arrested if it meant teaching me a lesson about not keeping tabs on her son. That's Mom, yes, I confess with a hint of amusement, before going back to the main topic. Still, you're trying to tell me that you consider this a good reason to fall in love with her, because she threatened you? Because she did so regardless of my status and my current privileges. And she did so to protect family and... If I want a wife, I want her to be someone that focuses first on the family rather than the pride or the image of the clan. Sensei dash. Everyone expects my future wife to be someone fitting within the clan. Maybe even a family member to preserve the purity of the bloodline, and I'm not having any of it, he replied sternly, not towards me, but more to himself. Miniko never once tried to bring up the clan and always remained to me as an individual, in this case me being your teacher and instructor, and that took me by surprise, and I found it amazing. The last bit was delivered with a hint of dreamy voice, and I was shocked by the mood swings the clan head was going through while I failed to fully wrap up what was going on inside his head. In the end, a single conclusion came out of it, and I wasn't sure I was happy with it. But still... Holy fuck, he is really putty because Mom cares for him as a person rather than the image he represents. The entire concept left me baffled at the mere idea Madara would actually find that attractive. Actually, scratch that, I could see that being a thing considering how he looked at Hashirama and Mito's marriage with minor disgust. Not because he disliked the two, but rather because it was a combined one, something that was born from a degree of unwillingness to a certain point. And since he was someone that wasn't going to ever consider an arranged wedding as a solution out of celibacy, I knew that romantic love was the way for him to get what he wanted. And he genuinely seemed to love Mom. And it was quite the terrifying thought to bear right now as I was done with my food and was hungry for more. So you really want to date Mom? Yes. Even though it would make things weird and dangerous for my family. I would deploy loyal guards to protect her, your brother and you all the time, Madara answered readily, still leaving me perplexed on a minor part of that topic. Me too? Why wouldn't I protect you as you would become my heir if we marry? Hold up, what? I was flabbergasted by that news. Are we going a bit too fast in that regard? He was just dating her and there was no marriage on site, right? You would need to be more specific. You're just getting the permission to date her. If Mom wants to marry you or not, it's up to her. Don't you dare think I will decide for her that big step, I replied sternly, and he nodded. I can agree to that, but from that I can tell you will accept any decision she will take. My lips twitched at his smugness. Yes. But only if that decision is done out of free will. The comeback had him scowling instantly at the implication I was raising with my words. I would never do that to a future wife of mine. I didn't comment on it, but I kept on thinking about it. This was going to be a mess to accept, and I knew that it was going to take a while to submit my murderous instincts when it comes to this matter, but I had a strong feeling Madara was going to do something stupid and I would get the reason to make things happen on him. I had to just bide my time in that regard and wait. The visit concluded with me lingering behind. Madara had other things to do and I just used the excuse I was more hungry to remain around some more by the restaurant. Scratching underneath my chin, which was still devoid of any beard, I tried to really put an end to the whole idea I had on this matter. It was futile to deny that what the man said was correct. Mom was definitely going to consider, maybe give it a try, and then, after some time had gone by and she got a genuine understanding of who Madara was, make her own decision about remarrying. It was going to be a mess to add more reasons for the first Hunter-Neens to come around and start hunting me down due to IWA having a hate bone on me. Yes, that was going to be a mess to handle for sure, but at least I received good news later that day. The Hokage had accepted my plan and was keen to send me an envoy to get through the friendly offer to Suna. I knew it was going to take some convincing and help to get them to use the seals properly, but I knew that this was going to be the best way to cement them as our allies in future wars and other diplomatic endeavors. Of course, I didn't expect things to be any easy, especially since the trip to go there wasn't going to be as easy to manage compared to my holidays in IWA and Kumo. The heat, the sand, it was going to be quite unpleasant to face the desert at my current age, but it was doable. Once I was back home, I started to pack my things and prepare all the necessary things I needed to survive the trip and get done with the job at hand. It was going to be an S-rank mission due to its importance, and the reward was going to be handsome enough to propel more individual projects. Ah, I sure love when being a good man brings back some good money out of it. Chapter 28, Sealing the Deals. The track that connected Konoha to Suna wasn't exactly the same all the way. Two major elements were clear about it, and actually those that forced all travelers to make it crucial to be ready to switch clothes and equipment before going beyond the border between the Land of Fire and the Land of Wind was the almost instantaneous change from natural forests littering the surroundings of the main road to a massive desert that didn't seem to end. I had never dealt with a desert that big, beaches of incredible size. I lived in the coastal region of a big island in my previous life, so I was a bit accustomed to the climate. Not enough to really endure the heat or the temperatures. Those were troubles I was really not planning to face due to how irregular the road was and how deadly it would have been for me to face on my own. Because yes, while I had gained the support from the Hokage to be sent out of the village with the mission of aiding Suna's plight, I hadn't received any escort guard to keep me company. Both a frustrating element and a boon, much to my surprise. Because, while I was going through this on my own, as Mito didn't want Yoshiko to leave her side and be hurled to face the trip to Suna with how troublesome it was, and with Madara deciding to not join me on some trip to plant some plants rather than destroy people, but she was more than happy when I offered to give her a seal to summon herself on where I was and get her to help me in case of trouble. I had a good ally that made up for a shortcut to the entire trip, and she didn't mind the heat. Kiara giggled above my head as she happily soared through the massive landscape of sand below us. Her claws were carefully grasping at my shoulders, keeping a solid grip over those without hurting me in the process. I had thought of going by foot the moment I realized how expensive and risky it was to fit a cart to lead me to the ninja village, so I just picked a funnier option while also taking stops to not tire Kiara and also refill my water bottle in the few oases we ended up finding. This specific bottle was given a few seals that allowed me to store thrice its natural content through 4 seals, with a pair meant to hold the water and the other pair meant to release one of the seals when the water was emptied. After 2 hours of taking a long route to avoid any sandstorms between us and our destination, I ended up with a mostly empty bottle, and I didn't want to risk the chance of going through the last bit of the trip without water. Very intense for a trip. Not one I was going to make anytime soon, but I could see myself going through it again just to check on how Suna fared if the situation required me to. I arrived at the gates of the village 5 hours after leaving the Land of Fire's borders, so the entire trip took roughly 8 hours altogether. I left Konoha's gates at 6 in the morning, maybe 6:30 considering that I had to double-check the equipment and seals, tell Mother and Hanzo that I would be back as quickly as I could without being impolite with the timing, and I checked with the others if they were going to hold well while I was away for a couple of days. I was a bit worried on Kagami from the way he tightly hugged me before I left, bringing up this concern to Raira, Hiruzen, and Hirutada as to keep an eye out for him and prevent him from doing anything stupid. Still, the overall trip was devoid of any issues, and I arrived at Suna's gates by dropping from the skies. The entrance led to a small open-roof tunnel that led to the small valley within the rocky hills surrounding this specific section of the region where the village was located. The guards at the entrance were definitely surprised by my way of arrival, but they seemed to keep a solid calm while they prepared to receive me. "State your reason for visiting, stranger." The guard that spoke spared me a neutral look, while the other seemed a bit annoyed that it was all for a kid. His mood switched to a more formal one as soon as I presented to his more serious companion the papers that Hashirama gave me to present to both the guards and the Kazekage. There was a moment of silence as the man read, and then he bowed his head low at me. "Shimura-san, the Kazekage alerted us of your arrival, but we didn't expect a visit from you this soon," the shinobi muttered humbly, and I sighed. "It's all right. I took a faster method of traveling, so I managed to reach the village faster." Saying this reminded me of the promise I offered to Kiera to get me through this little hurdle. Suna was a desert-based village, so I could sense a high chance of her dishes meeting a strong following if applied to the traditional cuisine as calmly as possible. The track that connected Konoha to Suna wasn't exactly the same all the way. Two major elements were clear about it, and actually those that forced all travelers to make it crucial to be ready to switch clothes and equipment before going beyond the border between the land of fire and the land of wind was the almost instantaneous change from natural forests littering the surroundings of the main road to a massive desert that didn't seem to end. I had never dealt with a desert that big, beaches of incredible size. I lived in the coastal region of a big island in my previous life, so I was a bit accustomed to the climate. Not enough to really endure the heat or the temperatures. Those were troubles I was really not planning to face due to how irregular the road was and how deadly it would have been for me to face on my own. Because yes, while I had gained the support from the Hokage to be sent out of the village with the mission of aiding Suna's plight, I hadn't received any escort guard to keep me company. Both a frustrating element and a boon, much to my surprise. Because, while I was going through this on my own, as Mito didn't want Yoshiko to leave her side and be hurled to face the trip to Suna with how troublesome it was, and with Madatabi deciding to not join me on some trip to plant some plants rather than destroy people, but she was more than happy when I offered to give her a seal to summon herself on where I was and get her to help me in case of trouble. I had a good ally that made up for a shortcut to the entire trip, and she didn't mind the heat. Kiera giggled above my head as she happily soared through the massive landscape of sand below us. Her claws were carefully grasping at my shoulders, keeping a solid grip over those without hurting me in the process. I had thought of going by foot the moment I realized how expensive and risky it was to fit a cart to lead me to the ninja village, so I just picked a funnier option while also taking stops to not tire Kiera and also refill my water bottle in the few oases we ended up finding. This specific bottle was given a few seals that allowed me to store thrice its natural content through 4 seals, with a pair meant to hold the water and the other pair meant to release one of the seals when the water was emptied. After 2 hours of taking a long route to avoid any sandstorms between us and our destination, I ended up with a mostly empty bottle, and I didn't want to risk the chance of going through the last bit of the trip without water. Very intense for a trip. Not one I was going to make anytime soon, but I could see myself going through it again just to check on how Suna fared if the situation required me to. I arrived at the gates of the village 5 hours after leaving the Land of Fire's borders, so the entire trip took roughly 8 hours altogether. I left Konoha's gates at 6 in the morning, maybe 6:30 considering that I had to double-check the equipment and seals, tell Mother and Hanzo that I would be back as quickly as I could without being impolite with the timing, and I checked with the others if they were going to hold well while I was away for a couple of days. I was a bit worried on Kagami from the way he tightly hugged me before I left, bringing up this concern to Raira, Hiruzen, and Hiratata as to keep an eye out for him and prevent him from doing anything stupid. Still, the overall trip was devoid of any issues, and I arrived at Suna's gates by dropping from the skies. The entrance led to a small open-roof tunnel that led to the small valley within the rocky hills surrounding this specific section of the region where the village was located. The guards at the entrance were definitely surprised by my way of arrival, but they seemed to keep a solid calm while they prepared to receive me. "State your reason for visiting, stranger." The guard that spoke spared me a neutral look, while the other seemed a bit annoyed that it was all for a kid. His mood switched to a more formal one as soon as I presented to his more serious companion the papers that Hashirama gave me to present to both the guards and the Kazekage. There was a moment of silence as the man read, and then he bowed his head low at me. "Shimura-san, the Kazekage alerted us of your arrival, but we didn't expect a visit from you this soon," the shinobi muttered humbly, and I sighed. "It's all right. I took a faster method of traveling, so I managed to reach the village faster." Saying this reminded me of the promise I offered to Kiera to get me through this little hurdle. Suna was a desert-based village, so I could sense a high chance of her dishes meeting a strong following if applied to the traditional cuisine as calmly as possible. After all, most of the spices that were used by these dishes originated from this region of the world, so I could see their cuisine already having a degree of interest for spicy foods. Still, I was allowed through the gates, with one of the shinobi beyond the entrance as a reserve soldier being assigned as my guide while we walked up to check on the Kazekage. It was there that I finally got a full glance at the village, and I was surprised by how, well, sandy it was. Despite the defensive rocks surrounding the perimeter managing to hold the massive damage that all sandstorms around the area created, some of the dirt and sand still managed to litter the roads and the alleys of the settlement. People would pause just for a moment to see why a guard was escorting a kid bearing a Konoha forehead protector around his neck through the village, clearly aiming for the main building of the entire town. No one stopped outright to stare at us, and nobody tried to stop us as we arrived at the last destination as calmly as possible. More ninja, more staring, more everything, but we finally arrived at the doors that led to the Kazekage's office, and the guard knocked at the door before peeking inside and explaining why the abrupt visit. I didn't listen much at the exchange as I was soon given permission to enter inside. The Kazekage, from what I could remember from the canon timeline, was a businessman with a lot of personal power to himself. Akin to Hashirama, he was the one that rallied his people in a single village, which wasn't as easy as it had been for Hashirama and Konoha. Due to Suna's terrain and climate, it was clear that the process of convincing the natives was mostly driven by a display of power rather than proper diplomacy. It wasn't like I could really blame them in that regard, but I knew I had to be tactful if I wanted to dodge some issues with both the first Kazekage and possibly the second one. Shaman, the balding man that was the Kazekage's strongest aide and loyalist, would have replaced his boss the moment the guy ended up assassinated by unknown killers. He was the one that would push to create a new form of warfare by employing puppets in combat. As far as I knew, the guy was no bastard until someone threatened his home. "Kazekage-sama," I greeted politely, bowing down to the man and waiting for him to respond before going back to a full standing position. "Shimura-san, I've received Hokage-san's letter regarding your project, and I would be a liar if I didn't admit I have a strong interest in what you wish to offer to Sunagakure as a whole," Reto remarked with a serious tone. "I wish that we had the chance to plan out this alternative solution earlier so we could have prevented any issues between Suna and Konoha before the war happened." I smiled. I've heard that it's quite difficult to be completely logical when it comes to doing the best for one's people. It's a duty that requires mind but also heart, which is why mistakes sometimes occur during the application of best intentions. Konoha understands this situation, and we found no reason to truly condemn you for thinking of your people first, Kazekage-sama. It was best to start in a friendly way, and I knew I had to be appeasing only the way it wasn't counted as a weakness to exploit. The praise was well received, but I was nowhere near to make a potentially good deal out of this circumstance. Reto smiled, the man nodding back at my words while he listed out what he had understood of the plans and what he didn't, asking for explanations over these elements. I quickly helped him with the concepts that weren't clear, clarity appearing before him as he realized that what I was offering to him was a solid plan to outright fix the agricultural problem of the entire land of wind. And with that realization came a swift question which I had been thinking about while planning this solution, tying it up to daimyos. I would have expected for the fire daimyo to bring forth this kind of project. Could you explain why you thought it best that this was rendered available through the ninja villages? I nodded, my smile almost widening at that amusing line of thought that led me to formulate this very response. That's because the best way to help a country is to bolster the military first before moving to the rest of the land. After all, the military right now is what grants the daimyo the true power to exert its will all around, and it would be dishonest to not provide this degree of relief first to the main concentration of the Land of the Wind's main defenders. It was a thought that shook me the first time around, and yet the parallels I drew about the elemental nations and a former country of Europe were absurdly interesting. Not to a full extent, but it was clearly an unconscious reference that would explain why the military stood out to be a touch or more stronger than the daimyo in the political landscape. Quoting Voltaire, where some states possess an army, the Prussian army possesses a state. The military, just like it had been the case for Prussia, was the core of the nation, the main element that not only guarded the sovereignty of it, but also gave it power and prestige. Of course the reference was fully applied as the military here was independent to a fair degree, which was why its role was even higher and its power had to be maintained as properly as possible to create a stable regime. Which was why I wanted Suna's problem to be fixed while the Wind Daimyo was friendly with the Fire Daimyo. If Suna had a need to expand its fertile lands to increase its food production, there was nothing preventing them from going through with this plan. Hence why I knew that to cement the alliance between the two big sections of the map in this wide world I had to solve Suna's main problem for good. The response pleased the Kazekage, the man eagerly shooting back to the project itself and inquiring of precise measurements to start creating the underground rooms for the special farms I had planned out in the papers. I was more than happy to provide those, and an hour was burned getting all the details straightened out before I finally got granted the chance to get to my living quarters during my stay and spend at least 2 good hours of napping, as the workers assigned to the early stages of the project were now going to get through with the preparation of these rooms. It would take roughly a day to get the entire thing operational, so I knew I was going to be given the chance to also check around the village before the end of the day. First thing I did while checking my little bedroom was to look for anything suspicious. No seals, which meant they knew they would have risked a lot if I had noticed anything in that regard, but also nothing that could suggest any hollow hideouts near the walls. Everything seemed to be normal, which was why I placed down a couple of seals to keep my room protected and closed while I was away or even within that room. The door was sealed shut and reinforced, and I had a seal to alarm me in case someone damaged the door itself in an effort to get inside. I was quite the paranoid brat, but I knew better than taking my chances with unknown Kage-killing assassins wandering around at the time. The nap was a bit troubled, but I managed to get through it beyond a minor nightmare early on. Something about the seals failing, but I trusted my hard work too much nowadays to expect that to seriously happen, so I pushed back the crating to check once more for the seal's integrity before falling asleep once more. Once I was done with the nap, I knew that I had a few things I could do while being escorted around by the same guard as before. After all, I had to make a good impression with the locals beyond their leader. Kiera beamed in delight as she saw the positive reaction of her recipes coming from the chefs that had been willing to listen and try out a few of the dishes offered by the Phoenix. At first the men were suspicious of the idea, but soon they tried and they couldn't complain. They actually felt drawn to these ideas as soon as the first chicken wing was tasted by them. They were baffled, but also incredibly interested by the new tastes that tied up so well with the rest of their traditional cuisine. It was a rather intense cultural exchange where I had to prevent Kiera from turning too domineering due to the fact her ego was just inflating at the praising, and she was someone that liked to boss around anyone that foolishly addressed her as Kiera-sama. I had to also advise the chef on making sure to add a warning about the food since it was of the fried kind. Too much would have hurt customers, so adding a limit was only for the best to prevent any issues to come up for them to worry about. We stayed around just so that the first shifts with these new additions to the menu were tested by the customers, and, yep, the people here loved it. So much that they asked for a second portion about it. It was quite the interesting development, and something that worked on reinforcing Kiera's growing confidence on her strengths rather than leave her to wallow in her eccentricity-driven flaws. With that success, there was also a hint of good rep for myself, as the chefs were keen to mention while giving the meals to the people that the boy from Konoha was the one behind it. I wasn't sure if the nickname was a good one, but it definitely picked up traction and became the way they addressed me. The boy from Konoha. Maybe I can actually make it a name to become an idol. This first visit was indeed a refreshing one, but not what really got me quite busy up until dinner time. I managed to find myself a tutor when it came to puppet craftsmanship, and I was relieved when the guy was more than intrigued to actually help me a little bit. Shaman stared at my current work intensely, his vigilant eyes there to make sure I didn't miss a single detail about puppetry. The guy had followed me around without me knowing for a good part of the day, but he eventually decided to end up meeting me the moment he realized that I had bought a few books about Monzaemon Shikamatsu, the creator of puppetry, as a ninja art. I might have struck a friendly chord through that impulsive interest in getting these scrolls, with the man offering a hint or two of how to start working with the material for my test puppet. One would ask at this point, why entertain puppetry when it was best to train myself through the simpler and more approachable arts? The idea I had about puppetry was slightly crazier than anyone had ever tried. I wasn't exactly planning to create the perfect puppet for all situations, but rather created a support tool to bolster what I could already do. And my inspiration in this idea tied up to something I had seen a long time ago. Something bizarre. In fact, the first puppet I created had a single purpose, testing the whole theory I wanted to see materialized as a possibility with the right material. With its fist created to be closed shut to deliver punches, the faceless puppet snapped into action as soon as I grew quite accustomed to using chakra strings to control its movements. The puppet started to punch the target I set it against, displaying a modest pace into barraging the entire thing with its upper body, and it could do more. But it was there, the potential that I could do some crazy shits with these puppets. And no, I wasn't planning to bring corpses into the game, as that not only made me appear a psycho, but also limited the range of fun things I could do with puppets. Like making them resilient with the right materials in the near future, and even finding ways to cover the main flaws like the joints being much weaker than the rest of the body. It was a prototype, but I liked what I could see it do, and the practice test revealed that the potential I only hoped to see unfold was there for me to fully invest on once I was back home. I could seal the puppets away and use them to trick enemies in close range, or even long range if I managed to expand the production to 22 puppets? It was a strange number, but it was going to make sense once I managed to get the right materials and equipment to make them unique and specialized in precise aspects of the battlefield. Shaman was impressed, as it was the work of a beginner, and he asked me if this was my main focus. I replied it was just the beginning, getting him to comment about the chances of this becoming a strong element of my fighting style. I couldn't help but agree to the bald man in that regard, knowing that this was a further boost to what I currently had. More powers for me to play with until I gained a higher control over it. Still, the days soon started to wrap up as it was time for dinner and then getting back to my room to properly sleep. I managed to eat some warm miso soup to complement the fact that I ate fried chicken for lunch, getting all warm and really prepared to slam my head on the pillow and collapse in the bed for roughly 6 to 8 hours. The plan was simple, and yet a peculiar situation happened before I fell asleep. Kiera asked me to summon her. I wasn't exactly sure how that actually worked, but the girl had somehow developed a way to poke at my mind when she wanted to come along to talk or something else. Maybe even poke fun at me in general. She was quick to grow bored, and quicker to grow withdrawn from not being around her first best friend ever. So, I summoned her into the room, and I saw the fiery bird swiftly nestling herself on my chest, eyes wide open as she was clearly intrigued by an idea she just thought about. "Danzo?" she asked with the innocence of someone that wanted to burn a whole building down and needed to trick an ally into helping her in that heinous deed. Oddly specific, but she has this things about burning things for some reasons. I hummed. "Yes, Kiera? Can I sleep with you? I mean, on the bed. That other thing would be outright weird and silly since we are just best buddies and all of that." And Dash the Phoenix asked with a hint of interest as she tried to elaborate on what she was meaning with that, making me sigh at the initial request. "Didn't we have this conversation before? If I turn on the side, I could end up hurting you while we're sleeping." Her beak gritted in annoyance, but she knew better than just oppose what was true. There had been an attempt, and said attempt had concluded in her getting a little sore on one of her wings as I unconsciously pressed her too hard on the mattress while unconsciously hugging her. She said it was fine, but it really left me worried about what I could and couldn't do with her and how I had to gauge my strength to not hurt her. There was no reason to worry about death since these summons were, well, immortal. They easily went through rebirths if they sustained too much damage, and they normally preserved their memories, making it easy for them to take numerous hits and still make it without any losses. The only way to kill a phoenix was to obliterate them completely, but that wasn't an easy feat and one I was willing to put Kiera at risk for during that kind of battle. With no complaints sounding out at this rejection, I yawned a bit and slowly fell asleep, with Kiera still perching by the edge of the bed as she stood there, looking at me with a contemplative look and taking a decision on the spot. What I didn't know at the time when she mentioned a loose idea was that she was told by the leader of the Phoenix one thing that she had been unaware about for so long, and that technically all summons could do if needed, as I would then learn about. She was intrigued, but also worried how wrong that entire idea could develop without my permission. So, while she knew my refusal stemmed from the idea that her current form would make things impractical, she hesitated to go through the cunning plan she had developed, but she went for it. Just as I was completely driven into the utmost state of unconsciousness, I perceived a change in the bed, a shift in the force of pillows, so to speak, as I felt as if someone was sleeping beside me and was now pressing their foreheads onto mine. I didn't have the brain cells to wake up, knowing that it was possibly Kiera trying to sleep with me, but also not getting in bed in the process. I was quick to dismiss any worry with that response, and I got a full reason to gasp when I woke up to quite the unusual sight. I opened my eyes, and I was met with Kiera's mirthful gaze. At first I thought the worst, but then I realized that she was smiling, without a beak, and that her plumage was now replaced by human pink skin and short orange hair with hints of light blue by the ends of her bangs. It took me a moment to realize what had just happened, the idea of Kiera morphing in a little girl, and another to find relief on the fact she was clothed, but as the girl delivered a chirpy good morning so closely, I couldn't help but wonder one thing out loud. Since when can you do that? She merely giggled and pulled me in a tight hug, laughing like a mad girl. Since yesterday, Danzo-kun. And now we can play even more than before. I will finally kick your ass at that ball game. If one has to question my sanity as to why I just accept this kind of crazy, I will easily plead the fifth, redirect them to Kiera, and leave them mind-broken through attempts of grasping her maddening logic. Yep, this was indeed my favorite summon, and I couldn't ask for better right now. Chapter 29, Sealing the Deals. It was finally the next morning, and I had to get my true job started as soon as the Kazekage was ready to check what I was planning to do. In a certain sense, I felt nervous. Not enough to really doubt my current abilities and what I had in mind to do for the tasks before me, but enough to feel like I had to be extra careful to not leave any mistakes behind while applying the ink over the walls. After dealing with the surprise caused by learning that Kiera could now will herself between her original form and her newest human form, I knew that I couldn't exactly have her around while I was busy with this important job. Despite her protests, which were muffled by her eating some food as a human, which she mentioned was better since she wasn't limited by a beak, and allowed me to convince her by promising her I would have kept her much longer once I was done with the work I was going to be focusing a lot on. After a few moments of fake crying and a back-breaking hug, I was finally granted some much-needed silence to not mess things up with the current situation I was in. It wouldn't take long for the Kazekage to finally summon me right to where the indoor farm had been created. It was fairly easy to follow the guards sent to lead me around, quickly arriving at our destination without any issues. What I found there was perfect. It was now clear to me, even more than it had been the day before, that the Kazekage was really rational and extremely attached to discipline when it came to building creation. A perfectionist of sorts, which was quite the helpful boon to not have to headbutt over proportions since the room looked perfect to house all the sections required for a functional farm. I spared just a quick look around to confirm this, and then I proceeded to chat for a while with the 3 men that had been hired for the task of watching what I was doing, understanding all the elements tied to it, and writing down all the useful things tied to my work. In a sense, I was giving a lesson to an old man and his apprentices, which was logical since Suna didn't have a major grasp in seal. So, my burden seemed to almost double out of nowhere due to this, but not in a totally upsetting manner. I spoke, calmly and clearly, allowing some pauses mid-work to not just give them instructions on the matter, but also allow them to scribble down some advice on how to train with seals, and those were, in most cases, already known to their sensei. Yet, the man admitted he didn't have a chance to impart them with this kind of teaching. I didn't stray from the main goal despite my genuine interest to not bash too hard on the current elderly that tied their experience of seals to mere experimentation. Not when the Kazekage was really putting out a strict behavior and keeping me at work. It wasn't like he told precisely this to me, but his posture and gaze just screeched of discipline and that any digression wasn't going to be ignored or condoned. Not that I blamed him for being this tense, especially when compared to his second-in-command that was just keeping track of my words and what I was doing to make sure this wasn't some sort of trick. I might have given them a good impression diplomatically speaking, but backstabbing wasn't exactly an element unknown to diplomats, especially those that were normally regarded as ninjas. I didn't plan to give them any further reason to suspect me of this kind of stuff, so I was eager to get all the seals drawn and ready to work and get the experts studying the case to get all the notes they needed to replicate this predicament as best as possible. And while I had more than once said that the seals were the primary element to get this kind of farm to work, it wasn't the only element I had asked about to get the entire experimental process working as properly as possible. I believe that. I'm done here, I hummed calmly, sparing a thorough look around to see if all the seals were now well written and ready to start working. It's been 2 hours already, and I knew we were far from done with this. Yes. Now, I think we can move on to the dirt I requested for you to retrieve, Kazekage-sama. The man slowly nodded, sparing a skeptical look while ordering the 2 shinobi assigned to that task to bring forth the kind of dirt I had wanted for the occasion. It wasn't something that was retrieved by the land of fire, but rather from the land of earth. Numerous scrolls were brought forth, most of those filled with numerous kilos of dirt that was specifically the best for this kind of situation. Those were going to be used to fill up about 3/4 of the entire room, right within the rectangular perimeter which was meant to house said dirt and create the small section of fields needed to get the farm working. There were small rectangular lines between each area where water would then be left to course once the dirt had been properly placed down by the workers recruited for this job. So, while the men and women assigned to the task started with their work, I was finally asked the question I expected from either the Kazekage or his second-in-command. Shimura-san, I don't believe you have explained properly why you requested this kind of, well, dirt. Shaman half inquired through these words, and I gave him a solid nod. I suppose you would want to know what's the difference between asking from the land of fire and the land of earth when it comes to dirt, right? I asked first, smiling as the bald man nodded. The dirt in the land of fire isn't naturally adaptable for this kind of situation. Not when it has to be contained to solid rock as it seems to weaken it somehow. I would say that due to a lack of natural disposition, that kind of dirt wouldn't yield the same results and that something like the dirt coming straight from the land of earth is much more adapted, experienced in a way, to grow fruits even in sturdy confinements. Hence why I requested it in this circumstance. I can see your point here. For a moment, I thought there might be a more worrying reason for it, the leader of Sunagakure explained. You see, Konoha might be our ally now, but that doesn't mean it could extend to the future. I could already notice through that indirect jab what the Kazekage was alluding to, but I could agree with him. A fair worry, Kazekage-sama. But while I might be experienced in combat, I doubt I would manage to leave this place alive. Konoha doesn't seek to alienate its allies, especially those that the village has sworn to aid in return of aid coming at them in time of need. We are bound, and it would be foolish to even consider severing that tie. But for whom? Shaman inquired curiously. For the one that would be unlucky enough the next war, I admitted somberly. It will happen. Sunagakure will stand against our common enemies, Shimura-san. Especially if it is IWA going to cause this enormous mess once more, the Kazekage bitterly replied. We will not allow for another conflict to be as brutal and vicious as before. Suna will prosper, and Konoha shall stand with us in the path of victory and success. The same guarantee Konoha extends to Suna, Kazekage-sama. I returned politely before shifting my attention back to the workers and their hard work. Roughly half an hour later, and I looked over at the artificial fields created for this very unique circumstance. The ground level was proper, offering the plants enough room to grow roots and properly form thanks to the water that was now being placed in the small open roof tubes passing through the entire perimeter and the sunlight that passed through the small openings by the ceiling above our heads. It was there that I finally activated the seals, and everyone in the room tensed up in surprise at the change of temperatures. Their eyes widened, grasping the novelty of finally feeling relief against the torrid heat that they had to face on a daily basis. It was there that I prevented a serious interrogation by bringing up that the cooling seals could be used on all buildings if those were adapted to fit the sizes of the buildings in question. I could see some hope and some distrust, but I knew they were still going to try and be successful about it. And yes, I was inwardly gloating as smugly as a guy like me could at their shocked looks. Danzo Shimura, Sunagekyu's best buddy for creating indoor farms, AC, and bringing chicken wings upon Suna's cuisine. Can I get a round of applause? No? I guess my brain is devoid of split personalities like Komoko and Katarina. Pity. Ignoring my foolish plight for voices inside my head, I went back to the current situation as there was only one thing left to do. And it was to instruct the hired farmers to know how to handle the indoor farm on their own. Most of the people that were there to work at it, at least those working the fields, had a decent control in chakra. Some were people that were labeled as unfit for combat duty or that had retired in a little while. They were all surprised when I finally explained why I had asked for this type of individuals first and foremost rather than normal civilians. I will teach you how to use chakra to grow your plants as quickly as possible without risking anything and gaining the maximum profit out of this. Understood? Several of them nodded, others were baffled by what I just said, and I guess, rightfully so. It was partially unheard of people that could use chakra to actually speed up the entire process, but, then again, it was also unheard of shinobi becoming farmers due to how much warring there had been in the last few decades and how farming was generally a civilian-dominated job. So there was still a fair amount of skepticality at my genuineness, which eventually faltered as soon as I went through the basics and helped people with their current tasks. I taught all of them to work in precise lines, with each field being theirs to individually work on in an organic system of work. They listened without hesitation after they saw me taking all the equipment needed for a farmer to start going through the simple but tough work and gave them a proper example by working by myself. I had spent days working with my own workers at the Shimura-owned farms, so I knew what I was doing here and I knew what to say to get the others to follow my instructions without any confusion or need to ask questions. The result was that, by the end of 2 more hours, 4 cooled biseal clay caskets had been filled with wheat. It was the test product, with many already planning out specific zones for wheat and others for fruits, vegetables, and spices. The Kazekage was immensely impressed by the result gained here today, and he decided to be a little more kind when it came to the ensuing lunch, where I found a few more plates of delicious meals set just for me. Really obvious as a minor thank you, but I accepted it nonetheless. It wasn't the reward I was offered that mattered to me, it was the one that was expected to be granted when Konoha would open up ideas to give both itself and Suna, and perhaps Kiri, a chance to progress into a bright future. I was mostly convinced we were done with this, as I had pretty much wrapped the whole ordeal in a lovely package to grant a greater stand between Suna and Konoha. I was going to leave by late afternoon so I could rush back home by dinner time. I wasn't planning to be discourteous with the Kazekage, but he understood I had a family that was already worrying a lot about me leaving for this business trip, and I wanted to be back as quickly and politely as possible. Just as I finished my little routine of checking the village with human Kiera on top to chirp at my ears and ask me to try some of the small snacks offered by the vendors around, we ended up arriving back at the Kazekage's main building to get all the paperwork signed before leaving so we could get back home for good. The documents were all signed. There were no hard feelings due to my proper behavior through the entire visit. I was chatting calmly with the Kazekage and shaman about planning some ways to open a bigger trade route between the two villages while leaving the building when something unpleasant and confusing happened. Something really, really bad considering we stopped to find numerous guards had been slaughtered right before the staircase that led to the village. A soul figure stood, bearing an unfamiliar demonic mask but with clothes that seemed familiar and yet not. A chilling shiver went down my spine and soon the figure spoke with a distorted voice. I found you. Blank, neutral, unforgiving. I tensed up and so did the two older men. Whoever this guy was, it wasn't the assassins that were meant to kill the leader of Sunagakure, and he was after me. Who are you? The Kazekage exclaimed, a brief stutter as he too was shocked not only by the side but the strange vibe tied to the stranger. Shaman was not that far from that mood himself, the puppet master mustering his creations as he prepared to move and defend his lord from any attacks. I'm nobody you can hope to win against. The confidence wasn't missed, and I swiftly tried to use the emergency seal to call forth Madara, only to realize it wasn't working. The strong attacker noticed and sighed. Shimura Danzo-san, it's rude to try and invite people that have no say in this matter. After all, I'm after you. This shouldn't be possible. The only way a seal could be tampered to this degree, so much that it didn't work completely, was only doable by disrupting the seal on one of the two ends. I doubted it happened in Konoha, but I could tell that there was one moment where he could have struck in. It wasn't possible. Not when I had too many seals for him to be able to get through and reach my sleeping form. Yesterday night, there was also Kiera. Her sensorial ability was nothing to scoff at and rivaled some of the top-notch ninja right now, and yet she didn't pick this intrusion. I gritted my teeth, realizing that due to this very feat, the man wasn't a normal human being. I doubted it was even possible for humans to be able to achieve that absurd feat. You notice now? The futility of any resistance against this assault, Danzo-san? The kick struck through any defense I got and slammed onto my belly. Had it been a touch stronger, it would have breached into the skin and stabbed deep into my stomach. My eyes widened in shock as I felt breakfast and lunch rushing up to my throat. I rolled on the ground, gritting my teeth and pushing the disgusting sensation back in my belly. My throat burned as the stomach's acids went back to its original location but still left me horrified by what had just happened. I almost barfed everything I had yet to digest, the attack almost putting me out of commission. I looked up from the floor, seeing something as horrifying as the realization I had before getting attacked. The Kazekage fell to one knee, right hand grasping at the left shoulder, a large part of the flesh having been chipped away in a single hit. I barely saw the masked figure blur behind Shaman, with two punches being used to break his right leg and arm. The bald man screamed in pain, but another punch, this time hitting the back of his head, had him slam onto the ground and create an indentation with his body. For the first time ever in my long ride in this world, in what felt an absurd moment to actually feel this very clear sensation, I couldn't help but feel true fear while seeing how easily the masked man dispatched these individuals. I had faced so many individuals and entities that I went over one way or another with what I knew. But this was different. I faced Madara, and while I stopped from facing his Susanoo, I knew I still wouldn't have stuttered with my actions. I wouldn't have hesitated to dodge or attack the construct, which would have been difficult to beat with what I had in that fight. But now I could feel that this man wasn't even trying, and I knew he could beat Hashirama and Madara at the same time. Maybe even Tobirama if he joined that one-sided massacre. Why does someone like this even exist? When did Kishimoto insert something so powerful? After Kaguya? Did they really put some BS characters that could keep up this well? How? I saw his attention back at me, and I barely moved in time to stop its falling rush up to me. I recoiled in pain, rolling away as the figure granted just a returning kick which I barely blocked with my arms. The attack left bruises on the limbs, and I could tell I couldn't block another of those strikes without getting my bones broken in the process. This wasn't the best situation to be in, and my wounds weren't getting any better. The rolling had cut parts of my shirt, leaving some small injuries that weren't exactly going to heal on their own and that weren't going to leave me without any distraction due to the pain. I stood up again, this time taking a stance and trying to beat the fright by willing my body to react. What ensued I could call a partial success. At best. The assassin ran back to me, a blur that I managed to dodge early on, but that still strained my defense by dropping hit after hit in an effort to overwhelm me with fast punches alone. Much to my chagrin, he almost succeeded, and backed away only when he realized I had the time to produce a few hand seals and produce a point-blank great fireball jutsu. The fireball missed its target, or rather the target absurdly shifted out of the way before backing away from direct confrontation. Impressive. Despite your terrified state of mind, you are still fighting. You are indeed a peculiar individual, Shimura Danzo-san. Fuck off, I replied as kindly as I could with the suffering I was enduring. He didn't mind, rather taking a moment to stare on the side and see more shinobi rushing in to aid the Kazekage, the man busy trying to bring Shaman away from the proximity of the fight while holding his best against the pain he was in. I tried to recover as much as I could from that instance, but I could tell my body was just taking a beating from the way the assaulter flawlessly cut his way through his opponents without employing any chakra or weapon. Only taijutsu. And it was terribly precise despite how light his steps were at the moment. Who is this guy? This is our enemy. Kagaya's voice appeared in my head out of nowhere, and yet it answered the question once and for all. Our enemy? It felt so abrupt to think that this was a character Kagaya actually knew about, and perhaps this was why she was preparing. He was the spearhead for something much worse, and it left me shocked to imagine anyone stronger than that. Still, that brief intervention wasn't just a vocal one, as it also brought something else to make me realize that something was being done to help me around. My right eye started to hurt a lot. I hadn't been hit anywhere on my head, so it felt odd for me to feel any pain there, but something happened. My reserve started to suddenly pour chakra onto it, and I could see something I was meant to. Chakra pathways. Byakugan? No. It was limited to just the pathways. Or so I thought. Feeling a degree of confidence at this being a good enough boost, and that there was something else that I hadn't noticed about it, I rushed forward while the figure was busy defending himself. He noticed, swatting away with a neck-cutting strike the remaining 4 shinobis fighting him, adding to the pile of dead corpses behind him. He braced himself, almost bored and disappointed by this attack from his bodily language, and yet that seemed to change when I finally struck a kunai deep in his knee joint in his right leg while he tried to hit me again with a kick. His attacks were now slower, and while my body was far from optimal shape, I was keeping up. And I was doing my best to return favor after favor. That didn't deter the attacker from keeping this battle going, and in fact had him increase his speed and power to neutralize my current advantage. But at this point, I had done the best I could to reduce his pace by hitting legs and arms. I focused really little on damage delivery, as I didn't have the confidence in managing to keep that successful rush going if he got the chance to pick up the heat and work around this brief boost. It was indeed brief, since it was burning my chakra way faster than any technique in my reserves. I was breathing tiredly by the time I had him slowed down to the utmost, forcing him to rush once more to try and kill me at once rather than play around some more. Brace! I will grant you a little gift. Kagaya's voice left no room for protests, and I merely nodded to myself as I felt something form from within my chest. An urge, a need, words penned by my lips as I prepared to finally strike. The masked attacker got close enough for me to move an attack, and I pushed both my open palms towards him and aimed those in a way that would have pushed him up in the sky. And then I spoke terrifying words that didn't even feel mine to pronounce, while my reserves burned roughly half of the chakra within their entirety through that unexpected gift. Shinra Tensei. The figure tried to move away, but even he knew that he couldn't move that fast out of the immediate gravity push. Reality morphed, distorted even, as gravity in front of me was suddenly turned into a propelling element that shot the attacker away as strongly as the chakra invested allowed. And he sure flew out of sight as the attack proved to be powerful enough to slap him well out of Sunegakure's bounds. I saw the frame rolling around midair, unable to reduce the speed in which it was moving, and I fell on my knees. My eyes stopped to burn as intensely as the chakra infusion seemed to outright stop the moment I saw the dangerous opponent brought out of the way as quickly as possible. Kagami gave me something, but I could tell it wasn't the Rinnegan despite the fact I used a Rinnegan-only ability. No, the I thing, it wasn't anything I had heard about before. Not Byakugan, not Sharingan, and definitely not the Rinne-Sharingan. So I was quite clueless about what had just happened, yet glad that it happened as quickly as it did. Still, I focused on regaining some control over my breathing, just so I could stand up and walk up to the Kazekage. Another round of guards approached, shocked by the sheer brutality displayed, but surprised when they saw me kneeling down to heal their leader's most prominent injury the best I could. There was no questioning, but I was at least given a solid thank you from the man as soon as he could be moved to be properly treated by doctors. Both the Kazekage and shaman lived, but I grimaced a little bit as I had to wait an hour before being able to properly summon Kiera, my reserves needing this much to refill as I ate some food to fill those up faster and get going. The Phoenix had keen eyes and swiftly inquired about what had just happened to me. I kind of got attacked by a scary assassin. So, I know this is a big request, but can you please fly faster as we get back to Konoha? Despite her own irritation at putting too much effort in racing through the skies, Kiera could perceive I was really recovering from the most frightening situation yet and, before giving me an answer, she turned back to human and pulled me in a big hug. As much as I didn't ask for it, I didn't exactly shy away from it. I just saw a deadly scenario. No, I've been there and it had been worse than the war. Much worse. I fought an unknown opponent that was insanely strong enough to put a Kage-level ninja out of commission with ease, and I could tell this wasn't going to be the last time I met him. His words echoed as I allowed Kiera to carry me across the desert, my eyes losing focus as I felt his words heavily burning within my mind. Same for Kagaya. Shimura Danzo-san, it's rude to try and invite people that have no say in this matter. After all, I'm after you. This is our enemy. What is even going on right now? What did I just stumble upon? Chapter 30, Make 5, making it 11. Hiruzen Sarutobi could tell that something was wrong with his first friend. While in a normal circumstance Danzo would know how to hide his worried state of mind, the fact that now was having trouble even hiding away the simplest hint of unease just left him a bit concerned. In a way, Hiruzen worried a lot about his friend. Danzo was strong, potentially stronger than him, but he was still someone that had limits. Some of those had been tested numerous times during the war, and he could tell that he had yet to fit back even after some months had passed since the closure of that conflict. It was upsetting how the conflict kept on haunting those that saw the worst end, while Hiruzen prided himself as someone that managed to overcome the few nights filled with gruesome scenes without seeing that particular situation worsening but improving until he was fully healed up. He still held a fair amount of sympathy for those that couldn't. War was ugly, the young Sarutobi could agree with his father's account of the previous one. This one was bloodier and definitely scarred more people than in the previous minor ones. It was in his return that he found out through the celebrations and praises aimed at his name but also of those that were enlisted and serving in the army that he was a war hero, and definitely someone that was worthy of bearing the title of heir to the Sarutobi clan. That mere discovery had him frowning, the thought tied to it leaving him mostly upset about it. He hadn't been worthy of it, until that point? Until he drew his first kill? His father gave him a solid answer by telling him how it wasn't the case, and that people were just trying to give him extra honor through that. Nothing to besmirch the past, but to validate it through the action made by the heir himself. A confusing understanding and not the reason why he was currently musing. In fact, he should focus back on his war brother at once. Danzo was acting shiftier than usual, and he was rightfully holding back something from him. That was more than enough to spur him to investigate, and the fact he was doing it with Danzo himself as his target just made the entire process he was going through even more intense than usual. Investigations were something that the brunette had started to take part in. At first those were simulations, but then his father started to have him wander around with him to see crime scenes if there was one or two, telling him the basis to study the criminal behavior of some individuals. Nothing too complicated, everything was, after all, based on Sasuke Sarutobi's own grasp of his job. A job he had started with minimal experience and that he still managed to be successful in despite some early bumps in his career. Hiruzen was supposedly going to be his successor in handling the police affair, so he was learning how to handle that kind of pressure early on. And he liked it. There was just a sense of thrill that was different from the one he felt during combat. Something that tickled his curiosity at trying to reveal what was hidden in the darkness of some cases. There were times the explanation was simple, others where everyone had to put an extra thought on it. In this peculiar circumstance, he learned that the situation was more complex than expected. First, he tried to approach mutual friends. Old school classmates were unable to give him a legitimate answer. He decided to check on his own classmate, not when he preferred to avoid getting lectured by Koharu about not annoying her Danzo-kun and how her dashing hero was probably busy doing something important, hence why he didn't talk to him. He knew that it would be a lie, and he really didn't need to up the dosage of getting called Hirubaka by someone he was slowly growing to detest. At least Hamura didn't squeak like a moron around any passing girl. Sure, Danzo had a boyish charm not many of their peers had, but that didn't mean he was a dashing hero. Meddling schemer with a propensity to explode things he didn't like at the first approval sounded mostly better. With that option out of the way, Hiruzen went to investigate other contacts. Friends that only Danzo had, even his own mother and sensei. Heck, he even went to check on the tailed beasts, mustering enough courage to ask them questions. The QB refused, while a giggling Nibby gave him clues he understood. Only that he was connected and that in the end, he was going to be shocked, awed, and then partly disappointed. That was one of the most ominous prophecies he had ever heard. Actually, it was the first time he heard a prophecy in general. He tried to further make sense of this by indulging his sensei and even the Hokage to provide him with answers, but both men were surprisingly unwilling to check on the matter. What really drew the most suspicion was that Hashirama Senju was keen to give another hint for Hiruzen to hear about. The final result would be of his liking, albeit not of the way he was currently expecting. More confusion, more questions, and a general sense of dread tied to this ominous case. What kind of surprise? And why could he tell something was so wrong about it? He was clueless, completely captured by endless scenarios ranging from outright weird to outright bad. He could tell something was immensely off about this very situation, and he was given further confirmation when one day he woke up to find that his father had left for work earlier than usual. While it wasn't unusual for his working parents to be forced into the office in the first hours of the morning for normal business, this time Hiruzen knew that it wasn't that. Not when his father mentioned anything to the boy's mother about his early leave. In fact, the woman was rather tight-lipped. What was Danzo doing and why was it spreading to everyone else? He spent the rest of the day outdoors, training and trying to check back on the words provided by Raira, Yoshiko and Himiko. Specifically the last one, as Hiratana was quick to interrupt something important by saying that it was not relevant, and that she was supposed to be writing down plans to conquer her possible suitor. It saddened him a lot to hear about arranged marriages, but Himiko didn't seem displeased with the idea. In fact, the usually stuttering and shy young woman just darted from the spot and ran back to her room while humming happily about getting him for the family and he will be mine eventually, which left Hiruzen more perplexed than not. Still, he found nothing, and he decided to get back home to actually try to involve his father in this one. He had avoided his old man for the sake of proving that he was capable of discerning the truth on his own, but it was clear it wasn't the same. Still, as he vaulted the entrance door and made his way to the living room, he was greeted with a dark room where shadow was cast beyond the small table. He frowned, confused, and as he moved to open the window on the side, his ears were assaulted by a chorus echoing a single word. Surprise! Hiruzen jumped in surprise at the noise, his eyes going wide open as he quickly scanned over the room. The Hokage, Lady Mito, the twins, his father and mother, Danzo's mother, Raira, Kagami, Hirutada, Hamura and Danzo. He narrowed his eyes at the last element, a cheeky look on his face before the brunette's gaze turned at the peculiar element on the table. A homemade cake with a candle? No, the candle itself was set in the middle of a tiny iron-made contraption which allowed it to remain stuck in the middle of the cake with a piece of paper at a fair distance from it. On the paper, a single kanji. 11. His mind went blank as he realized what was going on. My. Happy birthday, Hiruzen-kun. Danzo cheered happily. I hope you like the surprise. It took Hiruzen a moment to reorganize his thoughts. Mostly because he had to endure for just a brief instant the sheer pain born from having a broken pride at failing to catch on to something so easy as a birthday party. One that Danzo had been asked to organize. Hence why he had been so worried and shifty, but also why nobody was willing to tell him anything. It was a sweet defeat, and one that the cake was meant to help, as Danzo said it was a pastry he had recently conceived as a lovely dessert. It was a lemon cake, and it was meant to be quite sweet and thus a good meal for someone like Hiruzen. Sadly, the entire cast of guests would soon regret even taking a bite out of their slices. It was evident in their bitter faces, with some questioning Danzo about why there was salt in it. While the early assumption was that he did something, the truth was that even the boy was chewing in surprise at the salty betrayal, clearly unaware of this matter. But Hiruzen knew while he looked back at his memories, he remembered the giddy grin on a certain cat's face. It was clear to him what happened and how this was the disappointment he was foretold. And despite the bitterness ruling out a pleasant afternoon from unfolding, he could already tell one thing for certain. Vengeance is going to be glorious. Chapter 31, Omake 6, Babysitting is Tough. Nizen, I think this one is broken. I could barely hold a snort as I glanced at a confused Hanzo while he picked up Orem and gave her a close look. The baby girl spared him a wide-eyed look, but doing nothing else beyond that. It was definitely unusual for a child, but not completely so, not when she was dealing with someone like Hanzo. I could tell she was mostly awed by his mask. I was taking care of Kazuhiko as I realized, much to my eternal dread, that he was being the pest among the two for today. The Hokage had asked us to babysit his little gremlins while he and his wife were out to enjoy a nice and long stroll around the village. Just for enough time to recharge their batteries. Nothing wrong with the request since it wasn't that frequent, but I also had my own unease at the fact I brought Hanzo in this. Yoshiko was sick and stuck to bed with a little bit of fever. Nothing worrying, but she definitely couldn't go around without seeing that worsen. It was kind of odd considering how the Uzumaki clan was known to have people with absurd vitality, but I guess sickness of that kind was unavoidable. She is just surprised at your mask. Definitely thinks it is cool. He blinked at my attempted translation of the little girl's behavior. Oh! And the reason why I was a bit unsure about having my little brother helping up was tied to him handling small lives. Not because he was too careless, but quite the opposite. There was a time where someone was allowing other kids to let them hold a duckling, but Hanzo refused to even get close to the little animal out of fright to harm it. So, when he was asked to take on this job, he didn't exactly think this through before he ended up holding someone as tiny as Orem. The little girl's violet eyes gazed at his face in pure interest, something that made him even more perplexed than he needed to. I could only stare at the sight with a bit of uncertainty, while also keeping an eye on Kazuhiko. The little squirt was still tiny, but he had already mastered the mysterious art of the fast crawling. It didn't help that he seemed to know where to go to make my life quite difficult. One moment I am putting him back on the ground as he was behaving a bit fussy, and the next one I was actually pacing to keep up with his speed. Seriously, are all Uzumaki/Senju kids this fast with the crawling? What was I missing within their biology that made them like this? Despite my effort to answer to this scientific queries by studying the blitzing crawler that was Kazuhiko Senju, as he flawlessly made my life particularly difficult today. Meanwhile, Hanzo was actually getting an easy afternoon. Orm whined just barely, and the boy picked up from her reactions to many things what she was up to. His luck further gave him the edge as the girl managed to not have to need a change of diaper. The diaper in this world was different compared to the one I was more accustomed to, and it was even more difficult to handle. Mom was oddly happy to help me out in learning how to change one while exercising with a cabbage. The process, albeit simple to understand, was also tedious and time-draining. Plus, it generally required a lot of effort to keep the kids from doing silly things while I was working on it. Like pulling hair, peeing on me, or even going number 2. Number 2 was definitely the worst to face, even though it had been just one time and I had been able to not get stained by anything. I generally was a good babysitter with kids. Normal kids. I wasn't mentally prepared for the unpredictable nature of 2 children that were biologically geared to be difficult to handle without some experience built around their specific mindsets and behaviors. Much to my inner annoyance, Hanzo didn't saw any of that. He was spared in his first time busy in it to face the full onslaught of both entering in action at the same time. Sure, I was also lucky since I had to deal only with Kazuhiko, and the toddler was less troublesome compared to his sister, but he was still troublesome when he wanted to play around. 4 hours flew away with ease, and I found myself resting on my bed back home once we were done with this little affair. I was planning to enjoy the hour left before dinner in complete peace and away from the twins, when something very unusual and particularly ironic unfolded before my eyes. The first thing I noticed was Hanzo knocking and entering in my room with an uneasy look. Brother. I think we have a problem?" A quick look back at the most recent past denied that possibility. I hadn't pranked anyone. I kept by training and cooking and doing businesses, and I really couldn't imagine what kind of problem I might have created together with my adopted little brother. "What about, Hanzo-kun?" The boy didn't say much beyond turning around and show me the reason why he had looked so worried and immensely frightened. To be fair, what I was looking at was perhaps the most unexpected development one could imagine and made me question as to why the Hokage wasn't actually knocking at our door already to check for one of his missing kids. Because I could clearly see a giggling Orm clinging on the back of his shirt. My jaw dropped, I tensed up and the toddler waved at me. I was surprised by many things. I knew that the girl had currently small and underdeveloped chakra reserves, hence why I didn't detect her when she was sticking with Hanzo, the boy's reserves masking hers. Still, there was one thing that remained in my head. A question that I was quick to ask out of shock than else. How didn't you notice her? She is so light, Nizan. I didn't even feel her climb up. I had so much confusion, but I was glad when the Hokage visited and was understanding of the situation while happily playing with the toddler as if nothing absurd had just unfolded. I could tell this was but the first insane thing my brother and I were going to experience the moment we kept on being the babysitters of these children. And oh boy, how right I was with that early assumption about their future. Chapter 32, of Training and Whirlwinds. My return to Konoha was met with 2 kinds of responses. An overly positive one in the public front due to the successful campaign managed in Suna as both countries drew a closer relationship with one another out of it, and a permanent end to the brief diplomatic round riddled by tensions and impossible demands from the desert-based ninja village, which meant that trade was now stabilized for it to allow foster relations between the 2 countries, so to speak, while also giving the chance of shifting the attention back to other problems, such as the growing fishing dispute between Uchiha and Kirigakure. The other reaction, this one being set to a limited group of people, was one of concrete worry. When I first returned, it was Mito that noticed that I was way too tired from what had just happened in Suna, something that sparked the first few probing questions for what would become an hours-long interrogation from her, the Hokage, Tobirama and Madara himself. There were efforts to bring Hiruzen's father on board too, but it was agreed to avoid this due to the fact this matter tied more on those men that could potentially be targeted by this dangerous assassin. I decided against bringing up the fact the masked man was aiming solely for me for some reason, and that he was playing the long game from the way he just ignored the opportunity of killing me while I was asleep in my room. There were so many confusing details I couldn't understand myself, but I knew that the moment I told anyone that this individual was plotting my demise would just warrant more questions as to why it is me. Especially when I brought up the idea that this guy was beyond Kage level and with a strange kind of chakra within himself. I really didn't want that spotlight, not when it meant extra actions taken towards me which, in nature, would act to prevent the worst from happening to me, but they would also limit my chances of preparing and come up with a smarter and safer solution to use against this dangerous element. I brought up the situation with the seals and how none of them caught him in the act while he was in my room, and when the question regarding why this man was lurking in my bedroom came up, I reminded that I had prepared a seal to bring Sarutobi in an eventual fight and he somehow knew about it. In layman's terms, this assassin had been studying the general situation in Konoha for a while now and had the capacity of hearing what was happening within the village, especially private discussions. In this case, the Hokage was quick to establish that any discussion of this kind would have to happen in his office, but I was keen to take a more effective solution in the form of reverse summoning myself and someone I was talking with back in the Phoenix Clan territory. I doubted this masked figure knew where it was despite its absurd ability to pinpoint where I was in the elemental country. It might be a wrong assumption, but I was going to take chances due to how distant and how protected it was as a summoning ground. The conversation ended in a few points. I was to take an escort/guard if I wanted to leave the village for diplomatic missions. Anything suspicious seen within the village was to be reported to the Hokage, and everyone needed to be more guarded the moment some unknown individual with ninja qualities was spotted within the village. Simple things, but not necessarily good considering these precautions were conceived out of the scarce amount of info I was able to provide. Sure, I was withholding a couple of key elements, but none that would have determined with certainty the strength, and thus the danger level, of this problematic foe. Still, I nodded in agreement and I left to check back home as quickly as I could. Mother was happy to see me, same for Hanzo as he managed to get one step closer to advance to the next and final year of school. The academy hadn't changed much, but I could tell the next year was going to see some reorganization to expand the curriculum so that high-quality ninja could be produced from it. Yet I didn't exactly spend those days as calmly as I did before the trip. The end of the war left me wrongly expecting that there wouldn't have been any major cataclysm until much later in the timeline, but Kami came by and decided to pull a John Cena by telling me through recent action, "Are you sure about that?" I had to train my ass off way harder than I did until now if I wanted to have a chance to either win or even just survive the next encounter. I had thought a lot about what happened with the Jujutsu situation, knowing that the special eyes seemed to be tied to the Rinnegan due to the gravity manipulation I used. I couldn't use it now, making it a one-time thing, and I was sure that it was somewhat tied to an intervention from Kaguya. She had to have done something to allow herself to barely manifest in my body, but I couldn't exactly pinpoint how and even why. Still, it meant one thing: Deus Ex Machinas weren't the way for me to go, and I had to work my ass off to try and get back to shape with a new upgrade to my current skills. I had the physique and the chakra capacity to dare and do more with my current possibilities, and I planned to do so as soon as I got a day off to recover from the trip. The next day was where I actually started to dabble more into what to do with my training schedule, and I decided to up things to finally break through in new projects, such as studying enough lightning style to create something for wind and fire style. What I really needed was understanding how to pull either the lightning strike armor or lightning release chakra mode for the elemental affinities I was more accustomed to. And considering that the most difficult bit of both was learning the first and then the latter without getting killed through electrocution, the process was extremely sluggish. Even slower than how it went with the Raisin Shuriken due to the many issues I had to handle through. First, there was the lack of elemental affinity for lightning. Second, despite having a single hand sign needed to form, the lightning strike armor wasn't one I could conjure on the spot, possibly because I had to get a glimpse of lightning jutsus and thus needed to learn a few basic techniques first. And third, the training ground I picked was indeed the worst for a single, very irritating element. Ha 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 ha. You tripped on yourself. Again, Kiera mirthfully commented as I stupidly chose to train in the Phoenix Clan's lands. I pushed myself up, my face slightly bruised after the many trials and errors to get the first step done accordingly. Again. I think I'm awakening something in Kiera that I shouldn't be encouraging her to fully unleash on this world. The first week was invested into getting two of the simplest lightning-style techniques such as Light Bolt, the lightning equivalent of the Fireball Jutsu, and Lightning Balls, which was the same as Phoenix's Fire Jutsu but with electricity rather than fire. Despite the intense effort that it took, I managed to get my mastery of both techniques to a decent level, thus allowing me to finally expand on the current exercise that was becoming Kiera's subject of eternal laughter. I was finally making some progress with the Lightning Strike armor, the technique being fairly struggling at first when it came to keep up a stable electricity around my body without it giving me a quick death, and then some more when I started to move around with it. The speed was way higher than I had expected. The rest of the bolstered stats were easy to handle, but the speed caught me off guard a couple of times with how higher it was compared to normal. Cue numerous full-face kisses to the ground underneath me. And trust me when I say that it was the worst experience possible with how many ashes were in there. My whole self, face, and outfit were turning darker and darker by the minute. At one point I had to start actually taking breaks to try and fix myself, managing to just wash my face due to my limited equipment when it came to the cleanup operation and the clothes having to be cleaned up more frequently than usual back home due to this. Really irking, but nonetheless it drove me harder on completing the project and I, kind of succeeded. After a full month of trying, I got the Lightning Strike armor and I was really interested to see if the Wind version was going to allow me actually fly if the Lightning version was this focused on speed power. Of course, this wasn't the only thing I put some attention in. The puppet project was going along just nicely as the fight with the masked figure highlighted how getting overwhelmed by a clearly stronger and faster opponent was a big no-no in my line of work. I needed to have the numerical advantage the next time I faced someone this dangerous, and so I started to check on materials back home to create my first proper puppet made of special-made metal. I had read a couple of books about blacksmithing detailing that it was possible to imbue a metal alloy with chakra to draw extra qualities that were usually dormant on those specific elements. It was a stunning discovery, but nonetheless a little thing to keep in mind as soon as I got the full understanding on how to make a puppet of iron or something even stronger out and running for some further experimentation. I was going to get my aura out fast and quickly, or I wasn't going to have any aura. Also, I started to push harder on hand-to-hand combat. The beating I got from the assassin was enough to put this thought in a proper elaboration to come up with a most ambitious plan that relied on some radical and drastic choices. Instead of focusing on the usual lectures from Madara, I just started to handle the circumstance by seeking those individuals that I knew that could put me through duress when it came to that kind of fighting situation. Which is why I approached Hirutada with a glorious plan. A plan about friendship, helpfulness and I'm not going to close most of your chakra points just so you can understand our fighting style. That's plain stupidity, my good friend foolishly argued. It's a golden plan. You get some frustration out of the system, and I learn something new to improve my taijutsu. Once again, it's something stupid, the clan heir rebuked with a scowl. Why not just ask for the best fighter we could offer you as a trainer? I opened my mouth and then closed it. Wait, I thought you were the strongest after your dad at this point. Well, that's not true. Yet, Hirutada admitted. I might have improved through the war and recent training, but I am still far from that situation. In fact, I believe there is just an individual that is between me and that title. You already know her. Oh no. Dan-kun. It's been a while. Himiko was now 18, almost 19, and she was way more gorgeous and way more active than when she was merely 15. I blamed hormones and the tough training she underwent to reach this state of mind and body, as it left me to fend off against a more aggressive Hyuga in the long-term prospect. She was too happy to see me, especially with how eagerly she went for the classic head-in-the-chest kind of hug. With my head being the one stuck in her chest, of course. Hirutada grimaced at the chest, but his dismay was aimed at my current plight more than anything else for many reasons. It would take me asking how strong Himiko was in taijutsu and him saying that I would feel it to understand I wasn't going to be dealing with a fun spar. No, I was facing something more troubling than I needed. Especially when bets were introduced to make the girl more interested in it. Blush on her face, heart-like symbols forming by her eyes. Yes, I was seeing some anime signs that I was potentially going to face some era issues rather soon. And I was proven correct as the spar started and ended. The first session was distinctly brutal and one-sided. I wasn't meant to use any other element beyond normal taijutsu, and I was quickly overwhelmed by Himiko's insane ferocity. Something that was further elaborated and worsened by the fact that her posture and her expression were those of calm and concentration, way different than what her current massacre was. I lost twice in that first session before I called an end to it, and I was given a good enough reason to prepare for the next one with a bigger focus as soon as I was exposed to her tame bet. She got an hour of hugging out of me. An hour. It wasn't even normal hugging, it was me trying to not suffocate to the safety pillows she had on her chest. It wasn't even something that got me interested much, not when it was actively harming me. Pillows are tools of relief, not of suffering. I had 2 weeks of preparation, and a smug smirk that hinted at some betting prospects that really put me in a determined mood. I had to win the next time to avoid some not-so-pure affairs unfolding towards me. So, I had my own solution to it in the form of what I learned while fighting. Himiko didn't use much chakra in her taijutsu compared to other hyugas, with Hirutada commenting that it was an unusual but terribly effective way to create a unique style of close combat that produced the best results at a minimum sacrifice of strength and speed. Himiko's punches and kicks felt like homing missiles way more than once with how precise and vicious those proved to be. I was stumped by the news, but now that I was away from the suffering, I had a good idea on how to counter that kind of fierce fighting. I had looked at taijutsu wrong up until that moment, trying to keep by the rules because it was easier for me as I could work on the katas and learn how to punch and kick from known lessons. But now that I had a fair grasp of my current combat ability, I knew I had to take the extra step and go for something risky and highly rewarding if I wanted to break through my current limits. And that meant going for something that required my physique to be more on the line than usual. I had built some muscles, just a healthy amount for my age and size, so I knew that I couldn't exactly tap into what I was planning to do to the fullest. But part of what I had set in mind was meant to work. It all started from a single experiment back at home. I was in the compound's training room and calmly going through a few katas that I had seen many years ago back in my previous life. I had been struggling for a while before deciding that it was best to go for the Baki the grappler's techniques and not the Kengan Ashura's ones early on, mostly because I had the means to actually pull some of the insane feats of the former series. The show focused a lot on two factors, martial arts on steroids, and 4,000 years of Chinese martial arts. And also pseudo-demons and primitive man. It was weird enough to gain my interest and leave me with a positive impression of it. In fact, that day turned out to be a revealing experience where I had to explain to Mom why one of the few remaining training dummies had been shredded so badly through a 2-hour-long exercise and why I was bruised and had cuts all over my hands and feet. It was only the first day, and this phenomenon continued until, by the day before the second sparring session, my fists and legs were sturdier than before as they received less damage through the various exercises I put those through. My body was nimbler, and my taijutsu stance had been severely overhauled. I received visits from Raira, Kagami, and even Hiruzen from time to time as I wasn't that present as usual. They were all surprised by the strange process I was forcing through, but they didn't show any concern due to the fact that I was being rather calm, and Yoshiko visited regularly, so she knew that I was planning something rather unusual and that required her presence to prevent bad things from happening. At least I could rely on her jealousy to shield me away from the worst demand possible. Before the fight started, Himiko ramped up the scale and set a quite upsetting bet. She wanted a full hour of solo cuddling. Not a chance, not like this. And definitely not while getting smothered to death while at it. I wasn't dying like Jack Nicholson's character did in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I ain't a sweet prince planning to sleep a good night. So, I countered with something definitely meant to spare me from trouble. From now on, you will hug me with my head over your chest, not in it. There was a hint of surprise, but the context still allowed for hugs. I was trying to survive, not trying to run a friendship that was getting too weird due to hormones. Frigging hell, Himiko wasn't a bad person, just terribly silly at times. Still, the bet was accepted and I took a stance already, my guard instantly gaining a few frowns from both Hirutada and his sister. It was the first sign they could see that things were different now, and it was there where the young woman finally struggled to actually get an opening out of me. My posture was at ease, my arms and legs were tense and ready to spring in action. She tried to prod my defenses with a quick frontal assault, but one that was stunned, blocked and even exploited to land some hits when I timed the approach and flexed my right leg up to kick her chin and throat. Not too strong to actually hurt her in a deadly manner, but enough to give another clue that this wasn't going to be her win. 2 rapid punches, both lacking strength for 2 big reasons. I wanted to induce some fright at any approaches, while also making it feel like I was playing around with her. Had she gone serious from the very beginning, I would have possibly lost. But she made a massive mistake in the form of not only easing down her body to gauge my strength, but her mind too. What all martial artists worth their salt knew was that body and mind were equally important, with the potential of a fighter crippled the moment either of those two were either limited or damaged. So, by imposing a degree of fright upon my opponent, I limited their capacity to think through properly and argue with their own irrational fear. The paranoia was what really worked in my favor, as I continued with my little terror campaign. Still suspicious of my actions, Himiko still kept a calm outlook as I started my own assault. I merely walked up to her, smiling and looking up at her face. "Are you going to attack me, Himiko-chan?" A little provocation, one that gained a response in the form of an attempted punch to the side of my head to push me away. One that I easily dodged by backing away and delivering a swift and low-powered punch on her chin. Once again, she looked shocked, taking a step back and dropping to one knee. She was trembling, and I knew it wasn't just psychological at this point. Partly so, but not completely. What? What did you dash? A concussion. Or about half of one, I interrupted calmly, backing away from the immediate presence. The kick early on was the first step into creating these conditions. The power wasn't much to hurt, but it was enough to send vibrations to your head and get your brain to shake. The punch was what got your sight blurry. It's nothing bad, but another punch would be enough to have you pass out. Oh! I smiled. I think I call this my win. You won so quickly. That's because I have been in a situation where I know how to quickly adapt to trouble. While I respect your strength and your abilities, Himiko, I am someone that also tends to expand mine too in the process. And that loss was nothing more than a lesson to learn for the next fight. So here I am. She smiled when I reached out and pinched her cheek. I suppose my bet is enforced. How about going for some ice cream to celebrate? Despite Himiko conceding to both points, she still went out of her way to swear revenge to claim her unique hugs back, something that was countered by an angered Yoshiko that looked ready to start a catfight for the sake of preserving my purity for a better woman. It was fun, and it definitely remained a pleasant sight since it didn't escalate in violence. A bit of anime humor wasn't wrong, but it would have been lame if they had actually started a fight out of it. Not cool, and definitely not a good thing for me or even Hirutada to see friends, or friend and a sister, fighting for silly things. Training was going smoothly as far as I could tell, and yet there were a couple of things I was up to discussing with a certain rabbit goddess which had involved herself in that fight back in Suna. What exactly did you do? Kagaya blinked, tilting her head to the side at my question. You mean, what of the gift I gave you for a time while fighting my former ally? They were actually allied in the past? Yes, I replied, at this point, not even paying attention to the surroundings as those were the same as usual. The power I gave you is temporary. Due to our current connection, I can push some temporary powers meant to aid you in times of need. Of course, this need is tied to our common foe and nothing more, Kagaya explained with a slow nod. Ishiki is a considerable threat, one that I thought had died many centuries ago when I first took the God Tree's fruit for myself. He was meant to be the one to claim it, but I decided against conceding to the clan's demands, and so I saw fit to claim the power for myself and kill him. It would seem I have failed. Twice, I threw a little jab, one that quickly got a cold glare out of her. But please, continue. Ishiki was much stronger than me before my ascension. He was the true claimant of this world, and I the sacrificial lamb for him to use for his planned ascension. I don't need to explain how it went. You killed him, and yet you didn't stop just there. You did more than just control the world. I prepared for my clan. My eyes widened. This is why you created Zetsu. You wanted an army to counter theirs. She nodded. A preventive move to prepare for the possible invasions of new members of the clans. We generally have a degree of interest in going through with our plans regardless of how long those used to be. The Oatsuki clan dash. And I'll interrupt you here because I need to ask, is there a full clan of people with this much power around? In the original dimension, yes. Elaborate. What is this original dimension? The sealed goddess sighed in clear irritation. The Oatsuki clan originates from a higher plane of existence. I suppose you have never questioned why someone like me or Ishiki knew of this divine tree and the requirements to achieve the world's full control under us. Am I right? Yes, I answered with a nod. But I also find it odd that you actually are that you are an alien. So are you, Danzo. I froze, my eyes widening at that counterpoint. I remained still for a while, her gaze piercing straight into my shock. What? It took me a bit longer than I would have wanted, but it all makes sense. When humanity was blessed by my sons to receive the power I once held, Hagoromo-kun was quick to establish something that prevented me from reaching out for others. A blanket that protects the inhabitants of these lands from any involvement of mine. It extends to the children of those blessed with this mask, and it is something tied to souls. Which means that yours isn't of this world. What about it? How did you reach this place? The woman asked fiercely. And what are your intentions? I died and was reincarnated here. I don't belong in a situation like yours, Kagaya. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having any pleasant conversation right now. Fair enough. A reincarnated soul? This is the first time I heard of this case, but you're honest and your actions speak louder than any words. Far from fair. My cover was blown by the worst kind of individual that could have predicted it. It was nuclear-grade blackmail, and that could end up poorly if Kagaya returned to Earth. I couldn't allow her to get back. Not until she was a threat to me as a free individual. Are you afraid? Kagaya finally asked, having spotted the dread on my expression. Do you believe I would betray my own ally? Why? Do you think something you plan for the future will damage this connection, Danzo-kun? She was trying to push me into this topic. She knew she had a dagger aimed at me, but she had yet to determine the shape and the length of it before properly striking. Which meant that I had a chance to perfectly counter and disprove her point before things really mess up for me. Ishiki. Her eyes widened, but she remained quiet about it. What about him? Her voice felt quieter. You mentioned that you're loyal, and yet you betrayed him. You could argue that you did so because you grew to love this planet, but then you abandoned yourself to the idea of being a tyrannical goddess, I replied sternly. I was the one that extended the olive branch, Kagaya. So I will not accept being subjected to any form of suspicion until I have warranted that. On the other hand, I have a few suspicions about you. Did I do something to warrant that? Beyond your past actions? Let me put this simply, I don't know if this all began with good intentions or not, but do you really believe that I can trust you the moment you bring up something that could be used to manipulate me after what happened when you were at your prime, Kagaya? No. There was a strange silence after the single word, with the two of us preferring to look away from each other and think about it some more. And I knew that this argument, albeit mine as a win, wasn't what I needed. What we needed. We were in the same boat as this guy. This Ishiki was somewhat tied to what happened back in Suna. Then, I forgive you. My words lifted Kagaya's stare back to me, surprise painted on her face. Why? Honesty is the base of truly good relationships. When there is no honesty, even in a case of prideful refusal, then there is no relationship whatsoever. Which is why I think this is enough to forgive you, just this once. I glanced back at her. Mind you, that doesn't mean I will just ignore what happened today. I will remember, so I expect to be treated as your equal when it comes to handling a common foe. You might be the one with a past as a deity, but right now, your range of action is limited, and I'm the one that can move around and do things against Ishiki. I can agree with this. But I require a small deal before you leave. I can tell you will soon be back to your bed. I grimaced. And that is? Next time you visit, could you tell me more about your world? I would have told her no, but then I remembered I could tell a little bit of truth and then a bit more of lies, and she would still believe it to be true. I had an advantage in it and no obligations to be completely true and bring up all the details that could mess me up in that kind of agreement. I will think about it, but I suppose I can. Only if you give me more info on your clan. Agreed, she replied with a smile, and I was gone. I knew that I just shook hands with the devil, while the hand behind my back had two fingers crossing. Unpleasant, but it was the only way right now. Chapter 33 of Training in Whirlwinds. For more months passed since I won against Himiko, and I sure felt like I made those months matter a lot with all the hard work I put through those. Developing my skills was the priority, and I got through the last limitations that prevented me from unlocking my unique wind armor. Good news, it allowed me to fly. Bad news, it also drained a lot while in flight mode. It didn't drain as fast as long as I remained to fight on a surface, so I was quite careful to not overextend myself while using it. Taijutsu was further explored in terms of potential, and I kept on improving my physique, which was possible without damaging my body and hurting my growth. It seems odd to say, but I grew a bit taller since I started this whole idea of conditioning my body to harsh training and then using my own chakra to stimulate my muscles and let them heal quickly. I also kept on expanding my own stance by adding some other martial arts techniques to it. That and also investing more into chakra-based weights to further expand my overall balance and power. I didn't try to exploit the system, not when I was well aware I was no blonde knucklehead with inherent insane healing factor from Uzumaki bloodline and a certain lazy fox. Speaking of knuckleheads of the Uzumaki kind, I had a few run-ins with Yoshiko while I was jogging and training outdoors, prompting her to grow fascinating at the technique. It was clear the girl wasn't ogling at me. None of that. It wouldn't be yes, she was ogling at me. Hormones were already coming up and I couldn't exactly do much beyond doing the usual warning to stop doing that. Or telling her I would have told Mito about it. Still, she was quick to listen to me when I called her out on that and told her that she could give it a shot herself. Cue an argument about pretty girls having to still keep a healthy lifestyle to keep in form against abs look amazing on chicks. It was a bit of my shameful thing to appreciate toned ladies as they were the representation of peak hard work. Yoshiko listened. She was skeptical about it. I told her to ask her auntie, and eventually I saw her jog around with Mito herself, joyously dragging her tired knees around so she could develop a proper healthy body. I might have cursed the little redhead to a world of pain, but at least she didn't get the whole Mito guy package out of it. And I really didn't want to find her, one day, wearing the Taijutsu specialist's unique outfit. That's not a sight I was hoping for to ever be cursed with. Still, Taijutsu wasn't exactly the only thing I went with, not when my schedule saw an interest in expanding other paths that could easily heighten my current skills even more. Specifically my rudimentary step on puppetry. I finally got the first pieces to outfit 2 of the numerous puppets I planned to use, and I was quick to test them out. The first one was given steel to reinforce limbs, torso, and head. I made sure to keep the armor to a minimum necessary as to not cripple the speed too much. I also used some seals to further reduce the weight applied to the puppet when it was activated. As offensive equipment, the puppet was granted a medium-sized rapier that had a unique elemental feature of the wind kind. All sides were meant to cut things with ease if enough strength was put behind the blow. The result was that I now had the first of my collection, with the creation of a proper silver chariot puppet to use in case I needed to pierce through some strong barriers or kill anyone or anything at short-medium range off my normal reach. The real hassle was trying to get all commands memorized while using my chakra strings, and it worked. I felt incredibly relieved to see that this project was already yielding these positive results. Next was an incredibly upsetting attempt to involve myself in one of the few arts I had ignored for a while. Yes, I tried Jinjutsu and it proved to be as terribly unpleasant as hilarious. It was like being stuck for 2 whole hours to see a dark humor movie. It was fun at times, it missed a few lines, and the overall result had me questioning my choices in life. And yes, I was unironic about the feelings I got from the first few efforts. After all, you need to have a target to employ those, so I decided to rely on someone that wasn't Kagami. He was a bit surprised when I asked Hiruzen, but he sure loved it when it became clear that the reason I did so wasn't just because I wanted to go soft on him for eventual experiments. No, I wanted Hiruzen to pay for something incredibly horrible he did to me. Scarring even. And no, stop it! I don't like it. Why is there a purple lizard and I don't love you? Stay away from me. I chuckled, having finally unleashed on the world the horror that was creepy childhood shows on a youth, the first of many victims. Once I let the brunette go from that illusion-based nightmare, I decided to explain why he was subjected to it. Why he got my scorn and my vengeful actions aimed at him. Do you recall that bit where you agreed to your pesky monkey summon, that cheeky Enma, about stealing my clothes while I was showering and telling Yoshiko, Raira, and Himiko to go and check for me as quickly as possible? Do you recall ditching me to handle 3 ladies that were after me and saw an opportunity to try things, Hiruzen? Sorry? I forgave you already, I replied flatly. But I didn't forget, hence why you got punished. Tell your summon I'm coming for that hide of his and getting him some fitting retaliation for that. Yes, it would seem like, to match up Madara's bragging in terms of having given me the chance to pick up a summon a while ago, Tobirama had finally invested in Hiruzen getting his own contract. It was the same as canon, and I sure was surprised when I learned that Enma was actually a bastard early on. It would take a few decades before wisdom came and knocked at his door from the looks of it. Which in this circumstance also saw me discussing with Kiera and the boss of the Phoenix clan about trying to get into the Monkey clan's domains from within the summoning world. I wasn't sure if it was possible, but if it was, then I sure as hell was going to come visit and prank him there. No one pranks the prankster of Konoha. No one, but himself. Plus, Kiera wanted to burn chimps but after I was hit by that betrayal. That and because he did it while she was away from approach and couldn't vision the scene herself. Still, Jinjutsu was still a bit of a losing cause. It was good if I managed to overwhelm the target and subject them to my inner shitposting nature, but against specialists? I wasn't that confident. Plus I couldn't see myself going that quiet ever again. I was reaching the degree of chakra bullshittery that transcended standard ninja and was going into a level only a few had ever dared to go for. Hence why, on a lovely weekend day, I decided to pull a rather silly but deeply amusing move that saw me challenging one Madara Uchiha to a rematch. This time, I had confidence on my side about at least putting the fear of God in him. He knew that I had improved. A lot. But he didn't know how much, and thus, in his usual giddy self to challenge strong opponents, he decided to accept the challenge. The idea behind this spar was one that would still work regardless of the outcome. I wanted him to realize that I, someone that was way younger than him, was close to beating his ass despite him being one of the strongest shinobi in the world. If he trained, then Hashirama trained, and if Hashirama trained, then Tobirama would follow the example. I was going to employ maximum domino effect to draw these three to get their asses back to training and sharpen up their skills rather than let them to waste. Training ground, it was just us, kind of. I could see a certain Uzumaki and also a certain Uchiha perching off by the distant trees to see how this was going to be. I didn't feel confident to gain a win as, despite my progress, I still had little to nothing to break into Susanoo. Something that I knew Madara was aware about. But I had a plan. And I really hoped it worked well enough to frighten him up to drop the barrier. As soon as we were all set, he didn't hesitate to start the match as someone with his personality would. I jumped over his S-tier fire jutsu as a massive river of flames stormed the ground and forced me to shift into my wind armor to fly over the attack. I used the opportunity to dive towards him before he could redirect it back at me, but he swiftly stopped the jutsu to get his gun by. The massive fan cushioned the blow, reminding me that it wasn't going to be easy to cut into that thing considering the pure damage it could take before getting worn off. So, I merely switched to my lightning armor and rushed to the side, picking up speed and rushing even further to dodge an effort to intercept me with that blasted gun by. I wasn't going to get swatted away like a fly by that shitty fan. And my plan succeeded as I outpaced the weapon and got a few openings to play with. My lightning-enchanted fists struck his leg and the arm on the same side, possibly disabling for a couple of minutes his limbs, and forcing him to fall on his good knee and sheath back his gun by to body flicker away from the proximity. I gritted my teeth, swiftly looking around, and then I looked up in shock as I felt and then saw numerous fireballs descending from the sky. I rushed away, darting from a position to another to dodge the various elemental projectiles. The barrage continued for a while, and yet it slowly grew less intense, giving me the chance to unleash Silver Chariot and try to intercept Madara midair. I managed to get proof that the seal and the puppet's strength were top-notch at the initial stage, the rapier actually cutting into his armor but stopping midpoint. I pulled the puppet before it could get destroyed, the bastard swiftly pulling out his gun by once again. He finally landed, and he could actually stand properly. It took me a moment to understand the reason why he recovered this quickly was because of me. I taught him how to use medical skills to heal himself. It was minimal as an improvement, but it sure helped getting that kind of incapacitation to be solved as swiftly as necessary. He smiled, already feeling that the heat had picked up a lot since the last time we fought. And boy, I was about to show him that this was just the very beginning. I rushed straight towards him, but instead of just going for a mindless assault, I actually relied on some quick actions mid-run. First, I created 2 shadow clones, then I used 2 smoke bombs that were to be confused as the technique's unique way of creating copies, but lasting a little longer for the preparation of what I had in mind, and then I unleashed the ultimate distraction. I exploded the clones, causing Madara to be flung upward due to his quick thinking urging him to use his gun by. Again. I'm going to find a way to destroy it in a spar. That was definitely rising in priority in my bucket list. Still, I decided to distract him for a second time, this once deciding to employ a little special weapon I had kept for the occasion. As Madara was busy shielding himself against numerous wind-based pellets slamming onto his big fan, he failed to see the massive Fuma shuriken I had thrown mid-barrage. He caught it only when he saw its shadow looming over his head right before I pulled the strings inside it and unleashed the multitude of multiple small blades onto him. I literally stuck him between a windy issue and an iron-made quandary. Despite this seemingly successful attempt, I was well aware from trying to call it a win. Not when something I expected finally happened. All those shurikens, kunais, and rocks soon impacted on a blue surface that formed around the jerk. Madara's Susanoo formed swiftly, just as I had predicted, and landed down rapidly as it formed to its half-full glory. At this point, I would have surrendered, but there was a trick I wanted to employ that was based on some experimenting I had with Kiera, as she asked me a really compelling question. If you can create perfect copies of yourself, can you actually create copies of those individuals or things you have seen in the past? At first my response was the clone and then use the most basic genjutsu to alter the clone's appearance. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that actually there was something that I could do about it that wasn't that kind of simplistic element. In fact, in a way, I sort of created a new jutsu out of the shadow clones. I could technically create copies of things that I had seen, but only in terms of size and appearance, not of power and resilience. One punch was enough to kill this kind of behemoth. In this case, as I faced Madara's Susanoo, I employed the best counter to it. More smoke bombs, and I copied Hashirama's with human technique. The golem that suddenly appeared within the smoke didn't enjoy the cover for long as Madara rushed in to try and end the battle and stopped as soon as he realized what he was facing. It was that moment, that distraction, which gave me the chance to react. The golem wasn't as strong as Hashirama's Mokuton Jutsu, but it was still strong and big enough to give me a chance. It grasped the armored construct's neck and then proceeded to slam it down and expose its back. The least armored section of the entire construct. I jumped from atop the fake golem's forehead and gained extra height for the big effort to breach inside. Since I studied and learned how to use the lightning armor, I also dabbled into Chidori and Raikiri. Surprisingly enough, the process was incredibly simple, but also complicated due to the fact I was accustomed to spreading the electricity all over my body rather than a single spot like my right arm. Still, I got my knocking glove on and I rushed downward to get into that Susanoo. I cut inside as if it was butter and I was a hot knife, standing right in front of Madara as I tried to overwhelm him with the Raikiri. I was so close to success and I was moments away to actually win that match, but my feet stopped and I tripped forward. My electrified hands slammed on the floor, disabling the development as I realized that Madara was no longer there. An illusion, and that I hadn't tripped on some rocks, as a pair of arms had gotten hold of my lower legs and swiftly pulled me into the ground. Gah! Are you serious? I struggled, but I was stuck inside the ground. Meanwhile, the Susanoo faltered as soon as he slapped the big clone out of the way and freed itself from its hold. Madara appeared shortly after, the man looking a bit frustrated, fairly annoyed, but all in all, satisfied. And proud. "Hi, Dad," I muttered dryly. He didn't say anything, but I got a damn smile out of him as he pulled me out of the ground. Instead of standing, I just lied down on the ground, defeated. Another loss. Damn it. He chuckled as he sat down beside my tired lying form, looking over the destruction we had caused during the spar. It wasn't that big of a loss. Nope, I agreed. Almost got your ass with that last trick, didn't I? He chuckled again, this time remaining quiet as we both enjoyed some peace together. It was a bit surprising to see how things had turned, but I decided to ask a few legitimate questions. When did you catch me in your Sharingan? He hummed. It was while you were trying to enter my Susanoo. I'm impressed you found out a method to not only distract me, but also gain a solid sight over the weak spot of the armor and pierce it. So close dash. I will have to train again. I can't allow anyone to know I was almost beaten by my brat of a student. I could tell he was joking, so I scoffed. How about you just chill and go old and let me win? Isn't it morally right to allow? I doubt there is a good morality in letting you win this easily, Danzo. Fuck, so much to ask for a stupid win for once. Meanwhile, I had totally forgotten about our intrusive spectators, and as we were leaving, I noticed they were no longer there in their previous spots. Either they left mid-battle, or as soon as it was over. Either way, I was sure to receive some flack from one of them in particular. In fact, I almost facepalmed as my prediction proved to be correct. When it came to actually go through an official diplomatic business. A week after the fight, I was summoned by the Hokage to discuss the tensions between Kiri and Uzushiakure. Both villages were claiming both were betraying their part of the deal, the very one that was used to gain their firm support during the war. In my eyes, that very deal which I had initially seen as a means to gain more troops on the front ended up costing more than needed, as Kiri proved to be an unreliable faction to rely on. I blamed their paranoid leader for this. If I remember correctly, the bloody education system that would make them become the village of the Bloody Mist, the one where only the best lived at all graduations due to some stupid battle royals between students, had yet to be implemented. It was clear that this system born from meritocracy was going to be a true issue to be really worried about, as it fostered crazier shinobi and kunoichis to take charge of the nation as a whole. In this particular case, my visit wasn't one aimed at Kiri itself. No, I was going to the land of the redheads to escort Lady Hokage, her children, and Yoshiko to see how things were going back home. Sure, Mito saw Konoha as her primary home now, but it was clear that someone like Hashirama would never dare to cage his wife, so she desired to visit her homeland. So, since the entire situation was quite difficult and extremely important, I was given quite the escort in the form of a lazy fox currently napping on my shoulder. The plan was fairly simple: spend a week in Yuzu, get accustomed with the people, enjoy the scenery, learn some ancient seal technique, and try to keep a war to erupt over fishing rights. Considering past issues I had to handle, this looked like a child's play. Of course, there was the issue that Kiri didn't exactly see me eye to eye, despite the fact I was part of their allies in the First Shinobi War. The reason why I was quite sure of that was that they put a bounty on my head. I was Konoha's glory hound in their eyes, something that was considered unofficial, as many bounty hunters preferred Ankaku no Shur, Dark Death, Night Madara, and my actual favorite, since it was the canon one but coming out quite earlier than expected, Shinobi no Yami, Darkness of the Shinobi. The only major villages that had bounties on my skulls were Iwa and Kiri. I believe Kumo just didn't have the coffers to afford it, and the lack of major impositions over their surrender prevented any true hatred to really develop out of my involvement in their defeat. It was an odd switch I didn't expect to happen, but I was nonetheless curious to see what Kiri really had in mind at this time and age. If I remember correctly, the Mizukes had what I could only define as Stalin-level kind of paranoia. In fact, I wasn't even going to be surprised if I learned that he was the one that would eventually create the system that ended up screwing up the village. I was curious, but not suicidal, and definitely far from stupid when it came to dabbling in that kind of affairs until it was really necessary. So I planned to enjoy those holidays in as much peace as possible. At least, as much as Yoshiko was willing to let me enjoy those during the trip. Considering the number of people taking part in this trip didn't favor me picking Kiera for transport, it was decided to set up a more expensive route. A carriage with some ninja covering it while we were inside and moving into the closest port available, and then taking a ship manned by Uzumaki loyalists right up to Uzushio. Nothing too extreme, but it was going to take a while. And making a trip with Yoshiko pestering me about teaching her some of the cool moves she saw me use against Madara, and also babysitting the twins while Mito tried to handle Yoshiko herself, proved to be troublesome. Really troublesome. I barely found the time to nap, especially when I became the target of instant cuddling from the young redhead as soon as I closed my eyes for a brief moment to catch up on some rest. I didn't have anything against it, had I been younger and without the advanced mind I have at the moment. I was now 11 bordering 12, and I knew that hormones were only now starting to become a really nasty thing to keep at bay. I wasn't planning anything stupid, and I was going to wear a chastity belt if necessary. Ah yes, the years of me being a teenage part 2, the revenge. I hope I will be less moody since I've gone to the first one without much of a hassle. The real issue was going to come when it was the girls' turn to be more aware of how interactions worked. I was already seeing it in full swing with Himiko, and I sure as hell knew it was going to be a thing with Raira, but even worse in Yoshiko. She was clutching at me as if I was the only lifeboat in the sense of sea that was this world. The moment she knew of the things many adults were aware about at the passing of age, I knew it was going to be an extremely tough life for me to keep myself away from her. Especially since I was literally giving her the tools to eventually be a formidable hunter when it came to tracking me down. Still, I was hopeful that others that weren't Mito were going to move in and do something about it. In fact, I expected the Uzukage, Yoshiko's overprotective dad, to actually greet me as if I was the worst kind of threat in his entire life. I was expecting the stereotype to strike now more than ever. And yet fate decided to slide in and shock me when I was pulled in a tight hug by the man himself, the guy chuckling and saying words that damned me forever. "Welcome, Danzo, my future son-in-law." I'm dead. My body and brain had yet to catch up with that thought crossing my mind at that proclamation at our arrival and the giggles coming from Mito and Yoshiko. Chapter 34 of Training and Whirlwinds. Dear Diary, today I learned that there are two ways to deal with the Uzumaki experience. There is a healthy one which is based around having a small number of redheads that were easy to manage and couldn't overwhelm you in the short and long run, and then there was the insane one in the form of being surrounded by them, asked questions about an engagement I was quite certain I had neither heard and thus ever accepted, but also interrogated about Konoha's approach on seals. Ladies and gentlemen, this supposed vacation was easily shifting into one of the worst situations ever. It wasn't even a subjective mindset anymore if I couldn't even enjoy a moment of peace without someone jumping in with a question or assumption. I could definitely see from the multitude of misunderstandings tied to my relationship with Yoshiko that my father had taken his time of preparation before our visit to actually convince more than half the village that I was the girl's boyfriend. Or at least, something within the lines of me being closer than a friend. Which enabled rumors to be more legitimate and more pressing onto us. The issues I had with this whole situation? Yoshiko just wanted to roll with it since we didn't exactly have to prove anything too weird while accepting that situation, thus, it would be just us acting as if we were in that sort of relationship. Dad would never let us be unbothered by these claims. So, it would just make sense to let this happen just for the visit, she said with a truthful tone, and I sighed. Yoshiko, you're one of my closest friends, but trust me when I say it's best to not give in to their intentions so early on. Especially since they can use this as a reason to demand more in the long term, I argued back, winning only a temporary pout from the annoyed girl. She really didn't like my unwillingness to bow down to this whole situation. Mito was even more convinced it would do well out of a ninja training to create alibis when we were infiltrating a place. It was perhaps one of the most legitimate reasons possible to actually go for it, but I could tell with her coy smile it wasn't the real reason why she wanted this to happen. Meanwhile, a certain nine-tailed little jerk was snickering the whole time at my expense, claiming that it was perhaps the first time he saw someone this fierce and controlled be this flustered and upset about this kind of situation. Which further aggravated me and forced me to take a rather drastic decision. If you want to hold a strong against crazy, you have to deploy someone that has experienced crazy. It was there that Kiera came to play and was suddenly enamored by the Uzumaki clan. Chirpy, jovial, and her food was considered highly praiseworthy. The Phoenix now human was overjoyed by this gift. So much that she could hug me numerous times across the first day of our visit. And while she was happily taking on all the attention that was meant for me by creating things that were more interesting in the short run, I finally got the chance to properly enjoy Uzushio and actually get some books on seals. I had gotten a few advice on where to find some seals experts in the islands, as there were a lot of those here in Uzushio, but I soon learned that some of those were potentially reluctant to take in foreign students without someone to vouch for me due to how many infiltrators could try and steal the Uzumaki clan secrets. Thankfully, Mito came in to save the day with a small letter certifying my proficiency and right mindset to explore seals. I was up to enjoy a proper learning trip about the ancient knowledge that only those here in Uzushio could grant to others, and perhaps creating new variants to better human conditions. Good civilization is a good civilization. Lunch turned out to be quite pleasant as Yoshiko's father was less annoying during the occasion compared to the welcome party, as he decided to focus now more on his own daughter and the progress she made during her time in Konoha. Despite her sending letters back to him about it, the girl was, still targeted with multiple questions regarding her current life with her aunt. He was quite impressed as she told him that she was studying a lot and learning how to defend herself while also helping others, a bit worried about the short time period spent fighting in the war, but overall relieved that she didn't take part to any of the more gruesome operations in the mid-stage of the conflict. But while I was keen to enjoy a good meal away from trouble, here my name was brought up again, and it took me in a rather unexpected conversation. It was just me, Kurama sleeping in my lap, Kiera sitting on my left while Yoshiko on the right, while Mito, the twins, her brother, the Uchiha, and her sister-in-law, Yoshiko's mother, were sitting by the other side of the table. Danzo-kun, there is actually something that I wanted to ask you regarding the situation with Kiri. I understand that you might have a greater grasp to the specific topic, and I wanted your opinion about this. I frowned at the way I was yanked into the talk, but I slowly nodded. I will try my best. A smile formed on the older redhead's face, but he was soon drawing out quite the serious scenario. As of recent times, the relationship between Uchiha and Kiri has devolved into a state of quiet hostility. Not to the point of active aggression, but all chances of striking at us are gauged by them and exploited if possible. Specifically, it comes to the fishing rights, the leader elaborated tensely. We have been trying to do our best to keep things neutral, as we understand that we can't drag another war by reacting. None of the nations are ready for a continuation of the Great Shinobi War. While Konoha has recovered well from the losses, no one would jump at another war, especially in the eventuality Uchiha is the one attacking, Mito agreed quietly. Hashirama wouldn't be able to draw enough support from the people. So you took a more appeasing grasp at the entire mess, right? I questioned, receiving a nod. Well, I would say that's a good idea for the time being, but this is just advice. You should consider other solutions, since that behavior will eventually be seen as a reason to demand more. We're already working on a better response, but this isn't exactly the issue. I blinked, feeling like there was something I was missing about the whole situation. And so, the Uchiha started to explain what the problem really was and why he had gone around it for a while now. A few days ago, some of our fishermen were attacked while they were out in the sea. We had some ninjas employed as escorts to make sure no attacks from Kiri happened, but we ended up experiencing another kind of attack, the man muttered with a hint of nervousness, his gaze shifting on me, or rather to what was sitting on my lap. The witnesses confirmed that there was an attempt to attack them from the Rokubi, the six-tailed giant slug. Kurama tensed up at the mention, catching on where the problem really was about this news, but gave no other reaction beyond that. I knew that this was a bit of a conundrum regarding how to regard this situation and how to then deal with it. I had to be quite careful about it if I wanted to irritate the nine-tailed beast at the table, and I had an idea on how to do so. Are you implying Kiri could have befriended the Rokubi? A slow nod, and I sighed. Did Kiri strike after the Rokubi attempted to do so? And, after the attack, did the Rokubi linger in the area? Any particular reason for these questions, Dan-kun? Mito inquired, and I nodded determinedly. There is one, but I would need these questions answered if possible. The Uchiha thought about it for a moment, but then decided to put out his thoughts on the matter. We have reason to believe the tailed beast is still within that specific area, and, no, Kiri didn't exploit the situation as far as we are aware of. Then there is a chance Rokubi was actually prodded into that situation. Kiri could have spurted out of its slumber and directed it to find shelter into your fishing waters, I theorized, trying to find a possible reason that matched with Saiken's behavior, since it was considered one of the rare cases where the tailed beast wasn't a complete jerk and wouldn't be eager into attacking humans without a proper reason. It could also be possible that it thought the ninja escorts were part of Kiri and were planning to hunt it down. It's possible. Kurama agreed calmly. Saiken was always the one that preferred isolation out of respect for humans. If that slug attacked anyone, then it's either for a rightful reason or it mistook the fishermen for those that got it to wake up. The QB's own guarantee gave more legitimacy to my point of view, but it also set me up for a task that I couldn't exactly dodge. And the best way to confirm this is for me to go and check this myself. The two adults in the room were rightfully unsure about this, but considering I have befriended the strongest of the tailed beasts, and then the scariest of the nine, they knew as much as I could claim that I was prepared for that kind of shit. Hence why the conversation ended, because it would have felt awkward to press for more. Instead, they just returned to their meal and let me enjoy the rest of the afternoon in relative peace. Yoshiko still followed me around, same for Kiera, and we all went to explore Uchiha as the little Uzumaki took this chance to let us explore her favorite places. I wasn't even surprised by the fact it was a ramen restaurant. Yes, restaurant. They actually built a massive restaurant solely meant for ramen dishes alone. At least the snacks served there were good for an afternoon meal before we checked the small ninja academy within the island. Kiera looked incredibly mortified by this explanation. I don't know why I did that. I just felt like being called or something. Well, the mask was acting up before we arrived, so perhaps it wasn't her fault and someone else's. What if someone from beyond this mask was responsible for this? Actually, what if we were in danger at that very moment? I stood up and started to look around, but as I did so, and I caught notice of the location we were in, a cold and empty set of stone-like halls that formed an endless maze, I felt someone firmly grasp at my free shoulder, the one not occupied by Kurama. I slowly turned around to see who it was, but, instead of the demon, the Shinigami, or even the Grim Reaper, I was met with. Brad Pitt? Strike one, the younger version of the guy muttered, and I was confused until I remembered where we possibly were. If this was the Shinigami's domains, then it was correct to assume this form of the Grim Reaper is none other than Joe Black? He smiled. It's been a while since I found someone noticing me in this form. Shimura Danzo, you shouldn't be here, it's still too early for your departure. It was my fault, Kiera jumped in. It's just I felt someone calling for me and I touched a mask and we got there. Also, Danzo, Kurama hummed, glancing at me with a dull look. What is a Joe Black? That's a reference that only a few will get, Kurama. A mask? Someone called you? The Brad Pitt look-alike replied to the tailed beast before inquiring about the matter some more with genuine surprise on his face. The little fox on my shoulder huffed on my shoulder at that reply, but decided to confirm the previous narration. Yes. That's the story. Is it possible for someone of this realm to be behind this? Well, yes, but why would she? Wait, the Grim Reaper released me and walked up to Kiera. Let's check on something. The humanized phoenix was rigid as the manifestation of death touched her forehead. Let's see. Kiera, you're a phoenix and a summon to Shimura Danzo. You were last approached by a wrong call about a soul collection case. You tried to fake your own death. What? I exclaimed, and the girl swiftly looked away from me. I was just shocked by the absurdity of that description. Why? When? It was just an experiment to see if I could appear dead. I didn't do anything silly, I just managed to appear weak and unmoving for a long amount of time. Why? I asked with the same loudness as before. The Orangette looked away with an embarrassed look plastered on her face. I wanted to pull a prank on you. I was just shocked by what I was hearing. I just ignored the whole shit we were in and focused on what Kiera just confessed to. I imagined that kind of prank and I felt a little bit upset. It was a touch too strong for a prank and one that genuinely had me worried about the few times Kiera's moral compass went a few steps too far. Kiera dash. I know, it was plain stupid and horrible. Which is why I didn't do it and, sorry. Just don't do that ever again. I don't want you hurting. But that's the thing, the Phoenix argued quietly. I didn't hurt myself. I can actually shift my flame so it appears like I am not alive. Plus, I got really good at holding back my breath for a few hours. I frowned. What? It's a Phoenix thing, Joe hummed in frustration. You would be surprised to hear that there are some of her kind that unconsciously appear dead but are actually alive and just holding their breath. So, what you're trying to say is that dash. Someone I trusted with the job may have messed up something and tried to pull you here. For some reason I can't get from your vitals. You are fine as far as it came to normal phoenixes, Death admitted, frowning as he looked back at me. Likewise, you lack any anomaly that could have been caused by anyone in this realm. He didn't catch the fact I was a reincarnation? The mere concept was odd, but I didn't want to risk it and actually ask if that was actually the case. Alas, I know who might have done this, and let's just say she has a lot to explain." A chuckle reverberated from the man as he took charge and led us away from the empty space to one where there were more rooms with things. Some were filled with files and boxes, either numbered or labeled with letters. My early assumption this was a maze proved to be correct as we took several turns before we arrived at our destination. And this room in particular looked like an office that had been used as of recently but lacked the owner at a first glance. Calliope Mori, Joe's voice got a bit more demonic with that call, and I heard someone shifting upward and standing up. We were greeted with a tall skeleton with dull straight pink hair and pink orbs in the center of her empty eyes, wearing a simple black dress with the same colored tattered cloak. She had a scythe with her, which was now hanging over her shoulder. It was fairly smaller than Konoha's, but it was still well organized, and we ended up giving a quick lesson on general fighting to the students there. Yoshiko kicked some morons' asses when they tried to show off to her. Never scorn an Uzumaki woman, it was clear their mothers had never taught these kids that rule. The overall reaction to my presence was positive as students rapidly followed the words I gave them, and the teachers took notes on what could be improved about known tactics in combat. War teaches officers how to elaborate effective strategies that tend to work in combat situations. And those tied to infiltration and sabotage were even so more important during peacetime when it came to missions against a country during peace. Everything was moving smoothly for the first day as no one tried to kill us or anything like that. It wasn't like I thought or said anything like that, knowing that jinxing was a thing, but I was spared from facing any masked figure, and I was relieved when no sudden assassination attempt from Kiri unfolded during my visit. Instead, the real thing I worried about was the way Yoshiko and her family behaved during the occasion. Everything was going fine as far as I could see, but I hadn't been prepared for a little surprise that literally pulled me off the bed and left me in quite the awkward and deadly situation. And it all started by the fact that the girl felt something from within the island calling for her. It was night, and I woke up as I noticed the strange lack of warmth of a certain someone that had pestered me to sleep in my bed for a full hour before going to sleep. I blinked awake, tired and confused, but also incredibly frustrated by the fact Kiara had been pestering me for a while to get to sleep in the same bed after she felt something strange was happening within the island. A quick check with the Uzukage confirmed nothing of the sort was going on within the village, so it was just plain odd she was reacting this weird, and I just thought it was her phoenix sense going cray-cray again. It definitely did when we were in Suna and she wanted to explore a restaurant that proved to be an empty building that had been empty for decades. I looked around the room, just briefly seeing someone jumping out of the window and slowly flying away into the general direction Kiara said something important was unfolding. So, I just put on my clothes, woke up a very annoyed Kurama as it was too early to be pestered like this, and brought the prima donna with me as we gave chase to the phoenix via rooftops. It wasn't a long chase as we eventually reached a seemingly abandoned warehouse in Yuzushio's outskirts with most of its windows barricaded from the inside. I frowned at the overall appearance of the setting, but didn't hesitate following Kiara inside one of the non-boarded entries, landing right behind her as she walked up to a glowing mask standing on a pedestal in the middle of the large ritual room we stumbled upon. At first I thought it was the Shinigami's mask, the one that in canon ended up being shipped to Konoha before the fall of Uchiha, but then I realized that the shape was more skeletal and less demonic as the Shinigami's face was. "Kiara?" I called out, my voice stopping her on her tracks. "What are you doing?" Silence greeted me, and I was extremely confused by her current behavior. This was incredibly unusual considering how she normally behaved around me. I took a few steps towards her, but she took an equal amount closer to the item currently ensnaring her attention away from me. "Kiara, what's wrong?" The phoenix was quiet, her eyes still caught by the sight of the unusually placed object as if mesmerized by it. She approached it once again, forcing me to keep a close distance to see what she was planning to do by reaching the mask. "Stop, Kiara." I said stop. I pushed a bit louder, but my plea fell to deaf ears as the Phoenix girl kept on getting closer to the eerie thing. I picked up speed, trying to double the one she was going for, but I still fell short from stopping her as she touched it with her left hand, and the world exploded white as something supernatural shifted us away from where we once were. My footing faltered and, after what felt like falling from high place, I safely landed on a smooth and yet sturdy surface, and then I acted as a pillow for the falling phoenix. Kiera landed on me, avoiding getting hurt by the fall, but my back was a bit burning due to the awkward circumstance. As if awakened by the blast of pure light, the girl scampered off from me and stared right at my groaning face. Danzo? Winded, what is going on? My eyes narrowed on her, but it was an annoyed Kurama that answered. You left the room flying and we gave chase. Then you ignored Danzo's calling for you to stop as you were approaching the powering-up artifact in the warehouse we ended up in. She had been sitting on the corner on the side, right beside the entrance, which is why I didn't catch her early on. Teacher! She replied seriously, almost going for a military salute before pausing at the overall situation. Oh! Oh indeed, little Mori. I recall reminding you that summoning mortals in this realm was restricted, and yet here I learn that you decided to set up the arrival of these three. Apologies, teacher, Calliope replied with an embarrassed voice. How about you apologize to them too, young lady? You were the one behind their arrival. She bowed her head a bit lower. Apologies. I slowly nodded. Why did you do that? Her mouth opened and then closed. Lady Mori the Shinigami tried to push her to answer with his strong voice. I just wanted to return this. I kind of took it when I came around and I was just waiting for the best opportunity to give it back, the girl said while pulling out what looked to be one of Kiera's hats. This one looks to have taken a rough beating and had a small section connected with a dull pink patch. It got damaged while. Why yeah, it was pretty damaged, so I took some of my free time to fix it. As an apology, Calliope explained, and Kiera held the hat close to her chest and gave a teary-eyed thankful glance at the fellow girl. Thank you. Before the skeleton-like young woman could have said something more about it, she was suddenly pulled in a tight hug. The Shinigami in training tensed up and let out an unusual noise at the development. Guh. I believe that this solves the issues on your side of things, but it leaves me particularly displeased as I gave her a specific order, the Shinigami pointed out dryly, giving me a long look. What do you think? Why me? Because I can tell that any punishment I can pick up will not help her in the long run. I want to punish her to help her understand why she can't do certain things and why she has to do others she might not like, the Reaper elaborated. Hence why I want an opinion of a human to handle a most humane circumstance. I could tell he also wanted something else, but what? And why? Why was he giving me this kind of choice? Despite all the questions I had, I could tell I didn't have the leverage to press on the matter, and so I begrudgingly worked through this strange new task I got. Well, I guess that, if she is having trouble dealing with human emotions, why not have her learn those through? Kiera? I offered it to Joe. I mean, she is having that kind of issue. She could also write reports to prove she is actually learning. Yes, I can tell Callie would gain a lot from this kind of disposition. Of course, it will be Kiera in charge of the lessons, which means I will strictly forbid my student to help you with anything. A bit of a pain in the ass, but I was already expecting a catch from that kind of arrangement. Pity, but it's only logical you don't give that kind of power to a mortal. For some strange reason the Brad Pitt lookalike merely smiled at my question and had the two girls finally detached so Kiera, Kurama, and I could finally get back to Uzushio at once. I wasn't planning to waste the entire night being awake when there was going to be something really important for the next day. We were ultimately dropped back in the warehouse, and I sighed tiredly as we wasted half a night dealing with this mess. Despite her excitement at having made a new super cool friend, she quickly dimmed out as she realized it was night. Cue me dragging a sleeping phoenix muttering about chicken wings, Callie, and me during the rush back to my room. She was nuzzling and snoring cutely as we both went to bed. While I could tell today had been a big day, I knew tomorrow was going to be even bigger with how much we would have to deal with. Mostly because I was going to talk with a giant slug about possible grievances of the Curie kind. Gritting her teeth, the girl used a quick hand sign and vanished in a curtain of smoke. In her stead, a beautiful Loth appeared and took the brunt of that attack as the girl was once again back on the ground. I saw her go through a few more hand signs, but she didn't release any visible techniques, at first. Just as I stopped with the barrage, I noticed that something on the ground was actually glowing in. Seal! She had to have prepared this beforehand. That was why she took a little longer to be ready before the fight. Hundreds of golden chains emerged from the ground and rushed towards me in an effort to fully restrain me. No means to dodge any of those the normal way, and definitely too many to counter with anything available in my offensive arsenal. I should have expected something this clever, and she definitely thought she had won this one out, except that her demise lied over the fact I had completed a tiny long-term project that I had planned to test better in Konoha, but I felt a bit lucky. Yoshiko's smug and victorious smirk barely lasted a few seconds as I pulled my newest ace out for proper testing. The little shuriken looked pretty innocuous from a distant perspective, but had Yoshiko been given the chance to see it closely, she would have noticed that there were a few kanji letters engraved into it. Seals that were added with a specific intent and to become active only when a specific chakra pattern touched them. The engravings glowed a soft blue before I yanked it away, starting to count up to 5 as I waited for the lone projectile to reach the ground, and, as soon as I reached the final number and the chains were ready to properly capture me in a bundle of tight metal, I felt the seal activate and my body shift away at an unnatural speed back on the ground, with a shuriken now piercing my palm. Damn it, should have thought of calibrating this some more, I mumbled aloud, more annoyed at the injury than feeling the pain. I pulled the projectile out of my hand, knowing that I had to be careful about this issue. I knew I had to also push the current advantage. Yoshiko looked drained, and I could tell that this seal wasn't containing previously saved up chains. She had been filling it up during the battle, one step at the time. Very risky, and it would have had me beaten if I hadn't gambled with this prototype version of the Flying Thunder God technique. I was quite far to get to Minato's level of control, and I had to also find a way to get to Minato's complicated mess of an array that he used to get it to the greater reach and efficiency as the one of the original 4th Hokage. But let's put the theoretical talking aside so I could get this win for good. I prepared another of the experimental shurikens ready just in case she had another surprise for me, but I was relieved when I realized that Yoshiko was running out of juice and was desperately trying to overwhelm me through a ferocious but only slightly unfocused assault while using 2 kunais. I didn't let that sudden switch of tactics catch me off guard, and I eventually stood before a defeated Uzumaki. The girl had a tired pout on her face, her gaze aimed down as she sat down by the ground. I lost, she confirmed dryly, and I nodded. You did. So, what do you plan to do with our wage? Fair question, and I had a good answer to that. I could easily tell her off, but then that would be too cruel out of me. No, I wanted to make this situation smooth and pure, just to not see her growing annoyed by the gap. Well, I gave it a thought and I realized that there is something I believe can give you some energy. She frowned, but then tensed up as I approached, leaned down and planted a calm peck on her forehead. I wasn't planning to be extremely picky with close interactions, but I also had to be a bit natural about it. Plus, I knew that this deflated state of self was going to get her father furious and ready to skin my hide if he gets notice of his daughter losing like that. So, I guess normal things like normal hugging, kisses on the forehead and stuff this tame could do due to how long we had been close friends without getting her too motivated or desperate for more. There we go. You almost got me with that seal trick. Very crafty, but I was one step ahead. You're quite close to getting me in a cheeky mood like that. Her lips twitched in glee as a pretty blush appeared on her face while listening to my compliments. And just like that, I thought the entire situation was over. And, like it usually went, I was proven wrong when the girl suddenly gasped, stood up and took hold of my right arm. How did you get this hurt? Much to my brief surprise, Yoshiko hadn't noticed during our final brawl that my hand was damaged from the half-failed Flying Thunder God. Only now she saw the bleeding palm and was quick to tighten her grip over my limb so she could start healing it herself. I could do it myself, but from her, Chapter 35, of Training and Whirlwinds. Early in the morning, this side of the island was pleasantly quiet at this lovely hour. I was still recovering from a late night's sleep situation, but I was pulling myself out from my own tiredness through my latest shenanigan, which saw me facing Yoshiko in a glorious sleep-killing spar. It had been a while since I actually sparred with the redhead, but not because I really didn't want to fight her. After all, I wanted her to train, become stronger, get a bigger backbone, and curb her childishness some more. It was a bit necessary at that point considering how tense things were with Kiri. One could say that it was about time ninjas were ninjas and started with their assassination attempts. Just as I woke up, I learned that someone had tried to get into the palace while I was out dealing with Kiera and her newest friend. They had been aware of Mito's arrival, and it was clear they were after Hashirama's children and heirs to weaken Konoha in the long term. An action that gained some upset from the Uzumaki's elders and clan head. A rightful irritation which couldn't be directed at Kiri since the 2 shinobi and 3 kunoichi caught were lacking of the 4 head protectors that could connect them with a village. But it was clear it was Kiri, which meant I would have to return the favor when it comes to allying with Saikin. I was planning to take that fateful boat trip after lunch, just so that I could be fully awake and able to handle that kind of matter without any issues tied to drowsiness and hunger. Now, back to Yoshiko. It took me a while to convince the girl since she wasn't exactly up to spar with me now that she was back home to enjoy the places she missed, but I gave her 2 minor concessions which easily bought her out. 1, she picked the location where the spar was meant to happen. 2, the loser would have to do what the winner asked. Now, this last one could have easily been problematic if I didn't handle this carefully, but I didn't plan to hold back if the situation called for it. The girl was still pure to a fair degree, but she was getting to the age that, eventually, she would know how some aspects of beyond romance worked. And I was going to be the subject of all of that. I just could tell from the way she still hung around with me and how clingy she was. After taking a while to get everything set, emergency items and all of that, we proceeded to go into a small clearing behind the Uzuka's manor and set our little spar there. Do you remember the rules? Yoshiko huffed, but still nodded. Nothing deadly, never hit below the belt despite the fact that we are meant to fight dirty in most circumstances, and... She paused. Respect the log? Ah, she is already making me proud by remembering that. Yep. Now, I hope you're ready, Shiko-chan. Her cheeks reddened at the cute way I addressed her, but she managed to form a proper guard. It's not going to be like last time. I'm not letting you win through that. Oh right, I might have beaten her with some teasing tied to the way I called her. All to further mellow her into a putty adorable thing to tease and defeat with ease. But no, I really wanted to fight this time around, and I wanted to put the girl through some intense tests to see how much she really improved. Before I could take the first decisive step and take immediate control of the fight, my posture tensed as I saw 2 golden chains emerging from the ground, with the little redhead having sneakily prepared 2 of those to spring on that very moment, while another one was cheekily planned to rush up from the ground the moment I jumped to dodge the pincer move. Knowing that most of my available directions to dodge were blocked by that first clever step, I just went underground and boldly rushed forward to dodge the hidden chain. The golden metal rattled upward, trying to intercept me before I could get too close to its user, but it missed my feet by a solid centimeter, giving me the chance to rush up to Yoshiko and brawl her with how focused she was on the chains. Of course, the redhead wasn't surprised by this development, quickly dropping her chains and jumping away from the ground, soaring backward as I popped out of the floor and tried to distract her with a couple of shurikens. The projectiles were intercepted by a swiftly made water release, water bullet technique. A stream of cold water rushed onto the incoming danger, destroying the weapon's momentum and trying to hit me too in the process. I jumped over the stream, my feet carefully arching to land on part of the current, chakra pumping on my soles as I propelled myself upward, well above Yoshiko's current height. An amazed look appeared on her face, but that vanished as soon as the little Uzumaki realized I wasn't planning to cut her any slack. Numerous pellets of fire exploded from my mouth, the barrage descending towards her at a greater speed than she was falling at. Strong hold over me, I could tell she wasn't planning to listen to any protest on the matter. But even as she went through the simple process of fixing that wound, she didn't let go of me and started to pull me back to her home and gave me a solid order. Let's train again. But this time, you help me with it. So, like the usual? Yep. But at home. I wasn't sure what changed, but I had a strong feeling there was something more to it. And then I discovered that there was actually something different compared to the usual. The Uchiha was quickly out of his office as he heard we were training inside the house, and he was soon staring at our exercises, his gaze between the proud when his daughter managed to get a flaw corrected and the murderous when I called out any of those flaws with a calm voice. My saving grace was that Mito was around to chide her brother to not try and do anything dangerous while I was trying my best to not create a diplomatic mess. And the day was still far from over. I had yet to meet Saiken and try to smooth out the issues between Uchiha and the giant slug. Do you think we will actually get any fish today? It sure got a lot more quiet ever since I picked the get in a boat with just Kurama and slowly make my way into where Saiken was located option, ignoring the warning from pretty much everyone sane in this world that wanted me to keep someone around to guide us to the established location. It was already tense as it was because I was slightly ignoring my main mission of guarding Mito just to comply with her request of dealing with this hassle Uchiha was facing. I knew it was really important, but I didn't need any distraction, and I knew that the trip was meant to be an awkward trip if it was me, Kurama, and a stranger to guide us. Plus, the furball could detect his sibling, and I knew said sibling was going to pick up Kurama's energy. So, why would I even need a guide to begin with if I got a powerful enough radar to give me better estimations than the last cited report of some fishermen? Still, since it was going to be a sluggish process to reach Saiken's current hideout, I decided to bring a fishing rod for the occasion. It would be the first time I fished with Kurama. I wasn't sure if I did this with Sarutobi, but I was certain an instance of this kind happened when we threw paper bombs on the water to kill as many fishes as possible back in Kumo's beaches. Just to get food fast and without wasting time with this slow and boring procedure. But now, I wanted to enjoy the suave trip considering there wasn't much to do to speed things up without walking on the water, burning chakra that could help against a possibly aggressive Saiken and get a bit drenched in the process too. The sea here was far from calm, but the boat was created with special seals to make it resilient against the waves. If we're lucky, yes. But the sea dash. Why are you even asking? I'm no greater expert in fishing than you are, brat. I huffed. Just trying to make conversation here. I know for a fact you're not lazy enough to nap the whole journey. Your doubt about my laziness is indeed sad and disappointing. Still, why not bring up that summon of yours out and pester each other with a crazy conversation? Ah, she is busy with Callie. I think she will be free around dinner time, I argued with a hint of sadness, knowing that Kiera deserved to have her time with other friends beyond just me. So, it's just you and me. By the way, I have a few questions about yesterday, the small fox commented quietly. Starting with the fact that you knew the Shinigami's appearance. It took the appearance of the one individual I knew from an old book. Like it was a real silly tale about the Shinigami trying to live among humans so he could understand them more, I elaborated without hesitation, having got enough time to come up with a convincing answer to it. The kitsune was far from convinced, but Kurama still nodded before pushing for the next questions. And the fact you know the Shinigami, shouldn't you have brought it up to others? Shouldn't you have told this to your Hokage? There are truths that are meant to be kept quiet about because they can be easily misinterpreted, I argued calmly, knowing that, in a sense, he was right. I had a duty to be completely truthful with the Hokage if it came to matters tied to the village's safety. I don't know the Shinigami, he was kind enough to solve this mess quickly so he could get back to work as usual. The next time I will meet him is surely when I die. If I told this to anyone, their first assumption would be that I somehow got more powerful by being buddies with the Shinigami, or that he would intervene for me when it's clear that ain't the case. Even Kiera's situation isn't as simple as it sounds. What about the fire chicken? She has a friendship with one of the Shinigami's lesser subordinates. I smiled at the little jab. At the missing phoenix, but I had to straighten out this matter. It's not a protective alliance. Callie might try to help, but she can't directly influence a battle or a confrontation which might end with someone's death if Kiera asked. The repercussions would be enough to really piss off the Shinigami. I see. So you kept quiet because you don't want people to overestimate yourself too much, especially when you're much weaker than what they would think. Yeah. I mean, one thing is a one-time visit, another is a proper alliance that could easily tear the balance between life and death. It would be foolish for anyone to pick up this silly assumption because we met him. He is a fundamental force of nature that is divine in context, and it's clear he can't pull things to favor a small group of mortals because he feels like it, I replied with a sigh, fixing the fishing rod as I saw it waver a tiny bit. The Shinigami knows that already, and the only way he can really intervene is if there is a sacrifice of equal value to the request offered by the summoner. And I really don't plan to ever deal with the Shinigami himself until that last day of breathing in this world. I died already, I really don't need to experience that part 2 anytime soon. Just as I concluded that explanation, my eyes widened when I saw the boat was now shaking fairly intensely. I spared a quick look at Kurama and the nine-tailed fox sighed. He's here. The trembling eventually lessened as something massive emerged from the water right in front of us, raising a large quantity of water that was soon raining over our heads. I didn't mind the sudden shower despite how cold it felt, but Kurama sure got a whole lot more pissed at this whole development. I had to hold back a snort as I realized that he was completely drenched in water, a furious look now aimed at the large white slug now standing before us. Kurama-Nizan. It's been ages since you and I were standing against one another and you adopted quite the flimsy form. He sure sounds a lot more boisterous than I had imagined. Flimsy? First you rain your filthy water on us, and then you call me flimsy? Kurama dash. You better have a good enough offer to not jump this bastard and tear him apart for good, brat. He interrupted fiercely, glaring right at me and putting some of that dreadful chakra into it. It was a bit difficult to breathe, but I could still speak well enough to make a case. Have you seen the back of the boat? A confused look crossed Kurama's face as it turned to see a large number of dead fishes currently stored into the boat. Just enough to make a mighty meal for a mighty-tailed beast. If you don't try to destroy everything here because of your straightforward sibling, I could easily make some delicious fish-made banquet for you. Plus classic treatment with head scratching and belly rubs. Deal. I sighed, the pressure finally gone as I could finally turn back to the current element I had to negotiate with. The slug's head was slightly tilted, curiosity exuding from the behemoth as he listened to the interaction between us. Saikin. Little mortal, the slug replied flatly. I suppose Kurama told me your name. This is the second time it happened. No, I'm not giving out our names like that, numbskull. He is right, Saikin. I already know your name, like your other siblings, I replied truthfully. And we came here to tell you that you have been tricked by someone to attack a village we're allied to. Oh? The slug slowly leaned forward, curiosity painting his tone. How so, little mortal? The warriors of a village were slowly coming at odds with decided to attack you to the point of relocating your home into our allies' part of the fishing reach. It was done on the purpose of forcing your intervention against us with the belief that we were the same group, the one behind the first attacks, I explained without hesitation, staring right at the slug's head. Which is why we're here. To tell you that you had been tricked and we don't wish to cause any conflict between you and our allies. Peace? But how can it be reached? After all, I don't exactly have the means to share my side of the sea, and I fail to see any interest to do so. How about an alliance between you and the village these fishermen hail from? Beg your pardon? The Uzumaki clan is known to be a group of diplomatic people. They really don't see you as a threat, but as a venerable entity born from the wisdom of the sage of the six paths, something that Kiri doesn't share, as they see you more as a mindless creature that can be used to their advantage. And how would you like to form such an alliance? I gave him the same affair as Kurama and Madara, but instead of the belly rubbing and other physically pleasant offers which wouldn't be of interest to him being a slug, I offered him something psychologically pleasant. What about the children? Well, you're an amazing creature that has seen and faced many tales that would endear children and other listeners. Those stories you could only keep to yourself because no humans felt able to approach someone as amazing as you, I elaborated with a big smile. Think of it, the chance of giving your story to others, to tell of your impressive adventures when those would have been normally yours to keep away from others. In a sense, I can see that as a win. But what if people want more from me? The tailed beast argued. What if the Alliance for Defense was to waver during a possible war? We wouldn't be ordered to do anything we don't want. If we want to help, we can, but we're the ones calling the shot. No human has that right, Kurama confirmed calmly. In fact, Madara was the only one that really did anything during a recent war. She was around the brat and she had her fun killing off those that did the same that they did with you. Tricking you into annoying us. Oh, I see. So there are some foolish humans still around, the Rokubi conceded before sighing. I suppose it's worth a shot. I hope this village can handle a tailed beast. I smiled a bit wider. They'll love you. And I was correct. As soon as we made our way back to Uchiha, with the slug kind of replacing Kurama as a conversation partner and giving me hints on how to fish some good food to add to the big pile, the Uchiha was instantly intrigued by the boisterous entity I brought back to him. Not only that, but the overall ballsy nature of the Rokubi struck a strongly positive chord with the rest of the village. Kids flocked to the mighty-tailed beast that spoke of amazing tales with this confident tone that resonated with their heroic perception of tales. In a rather amusing turn of events, Uchiha ended up being the village receiving a tailed beast as their protector. An awfully convenient response to Kiri which, by all means, should have denied them the chance to counter with a greater aggression. I overestimated Kiri's capacity to be reasonable. Especially when pirates started to patrol within Uchiha's naval border and assault fishermen. At this point, a visit was much needed as soon as possible, but the planning on who was going to come for this was a bit clunky. The Uchiha wanted to be there to butt heads, but Mito couldn't exactly come with us. Not with the twins still in her care. There was a high chance that any meeting could be used as a way to attack Uchiha and get to the kids while they still were there. Truly intense, but in the end it was me, the Uchiha, 3 bodyguards. Kurama would remain behind to protect Konoha as Mito was an extension of what Konoha was, and anything coming her way, or her children, was tantamount to attacking the village. I would have planned something better about this, but I knew we were venturing in a trap. The bodyguards were experienced and all, but facing an entire village in their home turf wasn't a fun experience I hoped to deal with. But there wasn't much of a choice in that regard. These hostilities had to cease. One way or another. That's the end of this tale for now. If you enjoyed the video, cause why not, subscribe if you'd like. And with that being said, peace.